My name's Randy, and I'm a geek. So, this is the open meeting. Essentially, the normal course of events is I give a report from the steering committee. Steve will give a talk on what's happening in the program committee. Betty will give a financial report from Merit. Rob, I'm told, will be giving the mailing list report, and then I'll lead an open discussion. If there are urgent issues, we're not committed to a schedule or anything. Members of the steering committee and program committee, et cetera, although we're speaking, are not speaking very officially because, aside from the prezzo, nothing's vetted. And the microphones are open throughout if somebody needs one. I think there's a wireless back there. And, oops, somebody's making an ear sound. Could somebody turn up this mic? I don't feel like swallowing it. Hello, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I know I can speak directly into it, but I don't like to, and the mic can work. Computers are cheap. My time's expensive. Okie doke. So, first thing we're going to try is the steering committee report. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And what the heck's the steering committee been doing? By the way, you should know what the steering committee is because you were here for the last session or you've been around NANOG a long while. So I'm not going to draw org charts and garbage like that. Excuse me. We're trying to get the meeting schedule under better control. You notice this meeting's scheduling was a little exciting. I don't really want to go into why. Let's just say that's water under the bridge. Rodney's a hero. Betty's a heroine. And and we're going to try and fix it. And I'll go into some detail on that. We're trying to get the charter amendment set up that'll be voted on in October. I'll go into some detail on that. Still trying to get some mailing list policy and procedures codified to a more open and transparent level. We've been dealing with some copyright and IPR issues and some issues about press and photography and so on and so forth. Okay. The future meetings. Rodney, as I said, has pulled our chestnuts out of the fire this time. He's only done it 5 times. Now he's getting good at it. October in St. Louis with Aaron. Okay, October is our joint meeting with the American Registry, and so that's pretty fixed and nailed. Note that because it's a meeting with Aaron, that's the meeting we go back to the Monday, Tuesday schedule because Aaron does Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Okay. Joe, now there are many Joes, but that Joe is organizing Toronto for the first week in February because we're all looking forward to the weather and it'll be comfortable, cool, et cetera, and Toronto's the only city I really like that's between the Rockies and the Appalachians anyway. Pardon? Think about the rates for hotel rooms. And Joss is looking at Miami for the first week in June. If anybody would like to volunteer to host other meetings, this is the woman you need to talk to. Please. No. I come in the middle of February. I need something cool. Well, I live in Hawaii. Everybody comes to Hawaii in the winter. I go to Toronto. Okie doke. The mailing list, we're still working with the panel to get their process and procedures documented better. We're still working with the panel to develop an appeals process, and that will be actually in the proposed charter change. Note that statistics are published monthly on the NANOG website. So, how many messages, how many posters, how many people sending messages have been taken out and shot, and all those details. Okay? Please volunteer for the mailing list committee. There's one of the things we're going to do is the mailing list committee procedures for terms and appointments, et cetera, are being put in place, and there'll be essentially a selection in October, and so volunteers are sought. There are currently 3 members of the mailing list committee plus a merit representative, and that's the lowest limit. We could gladly add more. I'm sure those people would like to share the load, et cetera. Okay. So the current charter doesn't have terms for them, so we have a straw proposal charter change that parallels the steering and program committees, 2-year terms staggered, 2 sequential terms max without a vacation. I'm the one who drafted it, and with some modifications suggested by Kat, and just did this because it was simple, stupid, and like everything else. I'm old and lazy, so I didn't want to invent much. If you have other ideas, please come out with them. It does. Some of the purposes are it gives members a light at the end of the tunnel. You haven't signed up for life, you know, and you get to know what you're signing up for, and it allows a change or an easy exit without any pejorative and it's just normal organizational practice. Charter changes. Steve Feldman and I are working with Dan and Steve Gibbard, who did the current charter, or kind of led the current charter effort for the charter we have now, to get the modifications in order for San Jose meeting. I'm not sure we've succeeded with that. Dan or Steve would care to comment, but also especially for voting in October. And those are things like, as I said, the mailing list terms. The first charter had a lot of startup conditions in it, which are no longer appropriate and need to be changed to running conditions. And had things like Steve Feldman is the chair of the program committee, right? And I think Steve wants to have a graceful exit possibility also. So there's a list of just cleanup things. The only real structural change is that proposed for the mailing list committee to have actual terms, et cetera. Steve or Dan, care to comment? Hey, there we go.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. It just removes a lot of the, if you look in the current charter,
Who are you, Dan?
Hi. If you look in the current charter, there's a lot of...
You, Dan?
Yes.
Who are you?
Hi, I'm Dan Golding. Hi. If you look in the current charter, there's a lot of bootstrapping language saying when the first elections or first selections for different committees or groups are going to be. The changes basically just remove most of that language, and they sort of generalize things to say this will happen every 2 years, or this will happen at these intervals. This will be staggered. This won't be staggered. So it's nothing in there will really surprise anyone. It's pretty basic stuff. I think most of the language is done. I don't think it's been published. Maybe by the end of this conference, we'll be able to send something out to the NANOG futures list with a complete list of all the proposed changes. But it's mostly bookkeeping kind of stuff.
And my guess is, like most other groups doing things around here, if people would care to help, it would probably be appreciated. Okay, the steering committee is also working on some issues of rights and data. That goes from, that you can put copyright notices on your foils, and if they're small and unobtrusive, please, and so on and so forth. And that's pretty much worked out. Not properly formally published yet, but we've kind of got it worked out. And now we're working on what about rights to the streaming media, to see that camera right there. What about the rights to that, especially if you're a speaker at the general meeting and you speak, can you take a copy of that and give it to friends, et cetera, et cetera. But and what are the purposes and restrictions on its use? Okay. Note that a bunch of some press has said they want to come to this meeting. I don't know if there are any here right now. and if they'd want to fess up anyway. Merit may prominently tag their badges, so that people don't feel constrained by, oh my God, my picture might be in the San Jose Mercury tomorrow. We've asked that no pictures be taken in the meetings themselves, here in the general sessions, etc. People are welcome to take pictures in the hallways, etc. Presumably you would have the victim's consent, whether verbal or, if you're a formal publisher, probably you have release, etc., etc. And it ensures that the members are free from having their picture published without their consent, without public prejudice. You should realize that to help people find each other at NANOG, Ren has been, over the last years, taking pictures of the individuals that compose our culture and putting them on a website. So when you realize you want to talk to Joe from RCN, and how the heck are you going to find him when you get here? You can go to that website and look for a picture of Joe, and oh, that's Joe. And so there's a problem in how we go from that, how we kind of protect and encourage that, and on the other hand, not have people feel that they're subject to waking up tomorrow morning and being in the New York Times without their consent. And that's an item I've got to, that's known that people want to discuss, that I've got pegged on the later agenda. Okay, the mailing lists that you may want to be aware of, if you're not, are the NANOG mailing list, which is the main list, and it's for ops discussions only, and if you drift far from it, you'll be spanked. Discussions about NANOG, and this is a non-moderated list, is NANOG Futures. If you want to write nasty messages or even kind messages to the steering committee, steering@nanog.org. The program committee hides behind this. I've got it wrong again, huh? No dash. I'll fix it in a minute. The mailing list, administrative folk, the committee is at that address. And I think that's about the steering committee part of the story. Questions, donations. Otherwise, I'll hand the mic over to Steve to do the program committee. Yeah, Bill.
You said later on the agenda we're going to talk about the photo issue.
If you remember, people who read NANOG Futures, I put out a what would people like at the open meeting discussion message a month ago. I have gotten responses. I have those things which were brought up, each chopped into individual slides at the end of these formals, and that includes that one. But that shouldn't constrain the discussion, and many of those things we may find boring and not want to discuss, and people may have other burning issues. So, would the steering members stand up, please?
I was only half standing because, while technically a steering committee member, I don't get to vote, which is probably a good thing. Okay. All right, I'm going to tell you about what we've been doing on the program committee for the last few months. Oh, yeah, that's great. We had our triannual steering committee meeting in Tahiti last month. No, just kidding. We get to meet by phone and other exciting things, and email. Usual disclaimers, only the newbies haven't seen this before. The opinions are mine, the errors are mine. The program is a result of the hard work by the entire program committee, and I'll publicly acknowledge everybody tomorrow in the plenary, so no need to bother here. For this program, we had 37 submissions, which is up from 26 last time. We accepted 22 of those, which filled our available time. One canceled, that's not counted among the 22 at the last minute because the speaker was ill. And we turned down 14. I don't have a breakdown of those, but most of them are, I mean, they were fine, but there wasn't enough time to put them all in. The ones that we felt especially strong about, we've invited to resubmit for next time. There were a few where some last-minute changes couldn't be made in time, and that sort of thing. Areas for improvement, nothing unusual about this list either. Speaker solicitation, PC always needs to work hard at going out and recruiting speakers, sometimes ourselves, sometimes others. One of the things that we work very hard to do in selecting the PC makeup is to get a broad representation of the NANOG community. So we have different viewpoints and different areas of expertise and different sets of people that we can draw from to bring in a program that's of interest to a large number of people. The other thing, of course, that we need to work on, as usual, is scheduling. This meeting was a little harder because we didn't know where it was going to be and when for a while, but even so, actually the schedule worked out reasonably well this time, better than some others, but still, if the PC publishes a schedule well in advance, gets the call for presentations out well in advance, and make sure all the deadlines are well known, things run more smoothly. Program format, again, we're doing the Monday through Wednesday thing. It seemed pretty popular last time. We, of course, want to know what you think of it, and that should be a question on the surveys. If it's not, feel free to write it in. But we really want to know what you think of the Monday through Wednesday format versus the old Sunday through Tuesday format. From some informal discussions last time, some people loved it. The people who want to spend time with their families on the weekends loved it. The people who want to spend more time in the office hated it. So I guess you could tell who's who. We've moved the program out of the evenings so people have more time for social events and other informal discussions or whatever. That was a community request a few months ago, and we're happy to be able to accommodate that. So plenaries are in the morning, Boston tutorials are in the afternoons. Yeah?
In terms of the Monday to Wednesday versus the Sunday to Tuesday, about 50-50 split?
I think of people who actually expressed an opinion, it was about 50-50 last time, and hoping to get more data this time. Next time, of course, because it's joint with Aaron, we're forced back to the old Sunday through Tuesday format, so we'll have another basis for comparison then. And then after that, will probably depend on what the results of the survey are, what people tell me and tell us that they want. Okay, and we added the newbie meeting last time. This time we beefed it up a bit with some more content, thanks to Bill especially for a very good talk. We're doing lightning talks again this time. This seemed to be a big success last time. The only criterion for a lightning talk is that it has to be something that would be on topic for the mailing list, something to do with engineering operations of a IP network. We'll start accepting signups during the plenary tomorrow morning. I'll announce how to make submissions. Deadline is 12:30 p.m. Tuesday. Lightning talk is 10 minutes about anything that's relevant. You can have slides or no slides or whatever. The submission will be your name and an abstract. And the PC will sit down probably virtually Tuesday afternoon and decide which ones we like best. And the 6 best 10-minute talks will be given during an hour of Wednesday morning's plenary. Feedback, we need you, of course, as always. Program committee members have yellow or green badges. Mine's green. There's probably some yellows floating around somewhere. If you have opinions on the program, feel free to find us in person. Send mail to NANOG Futures if you want to talk about it in public. Send mail to, there's one of the many NANOG PC aliases. I'll make sure they all work. If you want to talk to us in private, those messages will go only to the PC, not to the general public. And of course, filling out your surveys is very important to tell us and to Merit and the steering committee what you think and how you think we could make things better. Oops, I missed a slide. Let me go back to it. Did it again. I am really good at PowerPoint today. Oh, one more time. Okay. And then I want my PowerPoint license revoked. Open discussion. Here we go. Okay, so we can discuss if you want to talk about program committee relevant topics during this meeting. There are some ideas. What do you hear more or less about during the talks, during the tutorials, during BOFs? How can we, the program committee, working together with you, the community, get speak topics you want to hear about? Charter revisions I'll bring up because we mentioned it a bit earlier, Dan did. I put together a proposal for a set of revisions to the charter about this program committee. It's almost all bookkeeping stuff, things like taking my name out of it, things like taking stuff about how the initial committee would be formed and all that because it's no longer relevant. Things about setting in, specifying when the PC is selected by the SC, you know, boring administrative stuff pretty much exclusively. I will, or somebody will, in the next week or so, publish the draft, and we could discuss it in our features. Transparency is an issue that's been debated a bit recently. The question is how much of the workings of the program committee should be visible to the outside. There are arguments both ways. Of course, you're the community, you want to know that we're doing our job and doing it well. On the other hand, a lot of the PC members feel that our discussions need to be done in a fair amount of privacy behind closed doors so that we can be honest with each other and make good decisions. If things that we say go on the public record, things that we say to each other go on the public record, it's going to potentially make things a lot harder. So that's the kind of debate we'll need to have at some point. And I think that's it for my list of open topics. I'm sure you can come up with others and we can talk about them too. And now I'll hand you back to Randy.
That debate is actually in my slides for the end, but having it now is perfectly fine time.
Either way.
Start debating.
So here's the thing.
Who are you, Bill?
My name is Bill Norton, and I have a great deal of sympathy for those who take the time and energy to put together a presentation proposal for NANOG. Sometimes this requires putting together slides and running them through PR, getting permission from your boss to present this at NANOG or submit it to NANOG for a presentation. To have those slides come back rejected is tough, and it makes, I think, folks maybe not want to attend that NANOG or not want to resubmit and go through that process again. The thought was maybe there's a way that we can put into the system a coaching or a shepherding, an interaction, so that it's not a send it over the wall and have it come back rejected, but rather have somebody say, hey, you know, the problem is you've got a very interesting topic, but it needs to be shifted this way. And have that person walk through the slides with a program committee person, so the program committee person can stand up and defend what's going on in that presentation. Because having looked at the slides for years and going through this process myself, I can tell you it's very difficult to figure out what's going to be said to a batch of slides and know what the presentation is going to be, whether it'll be good or bad, whether you can understand it or not. And that sort of thing, having a shepherding process as part of the process might put it in place. So I guess a slightly different twist of that is to have some kind of feedback back to the speaker that others can learn from. And that's where the idea of having the program committee meeting minutes go out there. You could anonymize the talks and say, this was a good talk, but it lacked 3 problems, or it's a talk on video stuff, but it didn't have the necessary math to back up the supposition 1, 2, or 3. I think that part of the feedback is missing from the system, and I'd love to see those 14 presentations that were rejected, at least a chunk of those people walk away saying, okay, I'm going to put it in for next time, given these modifications, rather than having that just pure rejection.
I will point out that when we do send rejections back, we do send it with a list of comments that are generated by the PC members, and usually comment I've added myself, explaining a rationale for rejecting it, and usually with an invitation to resubmit.
Randy Bush. I think there are a number of issues buried here. Okay. One of them, okay, I have one foot in another community, which is academic style research papers. So I draw a lot from that. One of the big differences between this and that is there's a paper. It's supposed to be standalone and complete. The presentation is something you go give at the conference and nobody cares. So you're reviewing the real final product. As you've said, Bill, you can't know what they're going to say. I don't think there's a way around that. I think papers, I don't know you're going to want to go here. I don't know. I under my quota of wrong for today. But my impression is it's hard enough to write the Prezzo. People in this community are, on the whole, not going to write papers.
I'm not suggesting requiring papers. I'm suggesting that maybe what I tend to do is white papers that have the slides along with the text that you would pretty much kind of walk through. So that when one looks at that white paper, you get a pretty good idea of whether this is reasonable or not reasonable.
You would require it?
No.
Yeah. Okay. Another thing is, I'd like to separate the concept of publishing the PC minutes from the reviews being signed by the reviewers. Publishing the PC minutes has two components. One would be how the PC operates. That seems to me part of transparency and quite reasonable. The second would be having reviews of papers openly published in the minutes. I think that would tend to it's a little strong, the word shame, but publicly shame authors, and I would have trouble supporting that. In other words, the slides for presentation, yada, 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 suck caterpillars is not something the author of those slides probably wants to see in published minutes.
That's pretty much my point, and I think I'm not sure what the right answer is either. By the way, on the other side of the coin, there's also the statement that, if the PC members know that everything that they do and say is going to be in the minutes, they may not be as free to give their open and honest evaluation of a talk. The counter to that, though, is if there is a bias within the PC in a particular slant, they don't like MPLS, for example, and therefore this is just another one of those MPLS slides, the rejection that the MPLS author guy will be anonymized, and they won't see who is saying what, and this is actually, a big MPLS bashing company that's on the PC that says this. So the question is, do you want full transparency, or do you want filtered and partial transparency, or do you want it where it is now, where there's no real transparency into the program committee? I think that's the issue at debate.
In where I have my other foot, first of all, when the papers come up and the batch are submitted, the reviewers, and when they come onto the program committee in the first place, declare conflicts. I've been an employee of AT&T. I should not, within the last 5 years, I should not review any papers coming out of AT&T, or I hate MPLS, or whatever. The second part, though, is you want a diversity of opinion, okay? And so, having a couple MPLS lovers and a couple of MPLS haters is a good thing, maybe.
Makes the meetings interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure. But the second part of that, the division of what's in the review and who reviews it, is in the academic world, probably 75% of paper reviews, even less, no, 75% maybe, is the reviewers, in 25%, the reviewers don't even know who wrote the paper. The paper comes numbered. You get the title and you get the body of the text. You don't get the author or the institutions even. Okay? So that's double blind. And the reviewed get back a review that doesn't have any of the reviewers' names or institutions in it. Most, 75% I'd say, are single blind, which is the reviewers get to see the authors and titles, etc., but the reviewees do not get signed reviews. Okay, because the reviews, as you said, well, you want the reviewers to be frank. The issue of prejudice is just one everybody lives with. J-Rex is going to be tough on my papers every time she sees them. The resubmission, it took us 4 submissions to get a paper into a conference. But unlike NANOG, they were submitted to 4 different conferences. And that's an advantage over on that side, It didn't work in IMC, let's try SIGCOM, and it got into SIGCOM, God knows why. Okay, so we don't have that alternative here. So these, the stories I tell don't necessarily translate well, but there are some lessons there. I know there are very few conferences, like 5%, where the reviews are signed.
I'd be curious if anyone out here has any comment. Feel free to stand up if you don't want to. Just, yeah. I'll just point out one other data point. And one other data point I find interesting is how many people here have submitted talks to NANOG that have been rejected? Is anyone willing to admit that? Okay, there's 3 of us in the room. It sucks. It really sucks. I would like to see us be able to pull some of that stuff back in, if it makes sense, to do so. I believe, and I don't have any data to back this up, maybe we could get Betty to do some research into this, but I believe that we are an anomaly. Randy, Lixia, and I think we're an anomaly in that we actually come back to NANOG and present after having the talk rejected. I suspect there are a lot more folks who, after that talk is rejected, they don't present again after that. Resubmissions from last time?
Game show host. Thank you. Ren Provo. We had several folks who took the commentary from the PC review and came back and resubmitted. I think that the new system that I'm sure Steve had a hand in is helping. They're getting feedback.
From last NANOG?
No, for this NANOG that's coming up, that are on the agenda for this coming NANOG. They took the feedback from the first round, they did the revisions that were requested, and they put the proposal back in.
So just to be clear, though, this was a conditional resubmission. We like your talk. If you make a few changes, then you're golden.
Sure, but
Okay.
the same type of commentary and feedback went out with the true rejections. So maybe that feedback loop didn't exist before when you were on the program committee.
I'll share one other sense that I got from the years I was on the program committee. What used to happen is a rejection email went out, and sometimes the person said, there's no correlation at all between the comments I got back from my rejected talk and the talk I was planning on giving. There just seems to be a disconnect. Maybe you guys didn't understand what I was going to say, and there was a response back. And that feedback loop was met with we better circle the wagons and defend our decision on this and reiterate why we didn't like this talk. As opposed to, I think, the more healthy approach, which is to find a way of pulling this person who obviously wants to help into the process, back into the process.
Well, the slides need to be standalone. They're going to be in the archives. So if the slides are not explanatory in any way, shape, or form, it's difficult to make valid commentary.
I guess I'm Chris Later. I'm with Broadwing Communications. I guess my perspective is that I don't see any problem with having that back feedback loop where you get somebody from the program committee that you talk to about your slide deck that you'd sent in, so that maybe if there were misconceptions or what have you, that they get sorted out. As far as the transparency of it, I guess, I'm of the opinion that I'd like to give the elected program committee as much freedom in creating their own level of transparency that they're comfortable with back to the community. So as in terms of the talks, I think in terms of what minutes they do in their structure and their process, having just gone through or in the midst of finalizing our flow chart for our process, I think they should have to do it as well, just because. But that's all I have. Is there enough of a continuous change process in the program committee that minutes are needed? If so, then yes. If there's not continuous cycles of change where your internal process is changing over and over again, I would probably say no. If something changes, should they say something? I don't see why not.
Well, the main tool that the program committee uses right now to submit comments is actually a web page where we go and view the slides and then put in comments. Some are internal comments, some go to the authors. So it might be a reasonable thing to do to have an automatically generated set of quote-unquote minutes that simply strip out the names of the authors and strip out the names of the people on the program committee. That way it's well, no, the comments would go with the description and the title of the presentation. Well, no, but there'd be no name. That's always the weakness.
I'm not in favor of publishing anything about individual talks at all. I think that's something that needs to be kept internal. I do believe ultimately the PC is accountable to the SC. The SC chooses who we are and sets the rules by which we do our job. We have a fair amount of autonomy, but that can be taken away because it's not specified in the charter. I don't mind producing attendance reports if that's something the community wants. I would, and I certainly don't mind standing up in a forum like this and explaining what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. That's again being part of being accountable to the community, and I'm all for that.
Steve, I think I support Betty from Merit, by the way. I think what would also be helpful just to achieve the transparency issue without getting into specifics of talks and names, if the program committee could at least publish when they're having conference calls to talk about or make decisions about the program and who might have been on that call and the number of presenters that were discussed. Really keeping it very general, but still giving the community some sense and accountability of the number of programs that are coming through, when you talked about it, and in sort of the review process in general.
Joe Abley, Affiliates. If I can skip back a whole bunch of topics back to one of the things Bill suggested, which was having PC members shepherd people who would otherwise give talks or present talks or were afraid to submit them, because they weren't sure whether they were good or not, and so having a PC member help them prepare the talk was a good idea. That already happens to a certain extent. Maybe, I don't know the numbers, but a small number out of every meeting. There's some PC member involved in talking to them, and this helps in two ways. It helps make sure the presentation is on track and that most people will, in the PC will understand the focus of it and will think it's complete and sensible. But it also means that when it comes up on the PC, if there are people on the call who haven't read it very closely or have missed the point or something like that, there's somebody on the call who can say, actually, you've missed the point on this. This is not actually about that. It's about this bigger issue, and this is really an example or something like that. So by having someone shepherd the talk through, you effectively have that feedback loop, because the person already had the back and forth with the PC member before the call, and that PC member can represent the person who's submitting the proposal during the calls that the PC has to say yes or no.
I absolutely agree. Dan Golding, would you step to the microphone, please? Dan Golding was instrumental in the NANOG reform and the charter document and such. So I have a very simple question to ask you. How does the steering committee know if the PC is doing a good job, and if PC members are to be removed, how do they know who if they have zero transparency into the process?
The original idea, and in fact this is actually written in the charter, at least I think it is that there's supposed to be one SC member other than Steve, who's a kind of honorary SC member. There's supposed to be one SC member who's supposed to be on the calls to be sort of monitoring the situation, to be a point of contact, not necessarily to be participating in choosing the talks, but to be sort of the elected person who's there, who's sort of I hate to use words like adult supervision, but so be it. And I'm not sure that's actually been happening.
It's not happening this time because we actually have two people who sit on both committees. Joe Abley and Chris Morrow are on both, and we figured that is suitable amount of visibility to what we do.
And to have more will create even more of a conflict at appointment time. Remember, in October, the steering committee has to consider replacing, possibly by reappointment, half of the program committee whose terms expire. And when there are PC members intimately involved in the program committee, those people have to recuse themselves from the consideration. It got to be a real pain last time. In fact, this program committee, a whole subsection of it, was chosen by only 3 people, because there were only 3 people on the steering committee who were not also on the program committee, and that's one of the reasons we tossed a bunch of them off.
Yeah, and that was really never the original intent. I mean, the original intent was to have them be separate bodies. That's why the whole idea of having, the chairman of the PC is on the SC. Well, it was a 50-person committee writing it, and those who were editors were more cat herders than actual wordsmiths. So. Yeah, and actually, I think in at least one draft, it was also there for the PC and SC, and it got, in the wiki process, it got dropped somewhere.
This is something that I'd actually like to see very seriously discussed as a potential charter revision for August. Or for October. I personally don't have a preference. I am very glad that we have the 2 crossover members that we have, because they're both very, very useful. But I can also see the reasoning behind the independence. And if that's something the community wants in a charter, please discuss it and let's vote on it.
Can I make a try at saying what might be a consensus, and then you can shoot it, that the PC should kind of keep minutes, but the minutes should be about the process, not about the reviews. Okay. Does anybody have serious problems with that or seriously like it? I'm not into big voting things. Oh, okay. I thought you were taking a vote. Does anybody have objections to that position? Okay. The second is, does anybody on the current PC feel that exposes them or has other deleterious influences? The second is, it would be nice if the PC were a little more shepherding to proposals which looked good but maybe needed somebody to hold their hand.
I would modify that, and I would say, should the PC members make themselves available to anybody here that believes that they might want to submit a talk and they want to talk to someone about it, and that those people should be available to help shepherd the talk through the process, help with the modifications, and ultimately defend that during. Yeah, we have colored badges, as Ren is pointing out.
Anybody have Objections to that? Okay. Does anybody have objections to the way I'm judging consensus? Then another is on the issue of signed reviews or unsigned reviews. Pardon? How is it today? They're unsigned. Does anybody have objections for maintaining the status quo of unsigned reviews?
To just be absolutely clear, you're talking about the feedback that goes only to the authors. That feedback will just be
Correct.
paragraph forms from different folks. You don't know who said what, but this is why it was rejected.
Yes, that is what I meant. Would somebody care to object?
Well, I'd just like to say I think having them unsigned does help in that it cuts out any sense of, oh, this person just doesn't like my material, and discounting on the part of the submitter of some of the feedback that may be coming back if it's based on a certain person's named review.
I'll point out part of the current process is on the website where we have to submit review everything. There's a section for comments for internal use only and a section for comments back to the submitter. And so far, I've never seen anything in the comments back to the submitter that really doesn't belong there, in the sense that it's too vitriolic or too personal or whatever. If there were, I would probably make sure that it actually get back to the submitter by working with the person who put it there. But it really hasn't been a problem. For the most part, every part, the current PC is very well behaved, does what we need to do professionally, does write real constructive comments back to the submitters, and perhaps we could do more shepherding, but it certainly isn't zero.
Ole Jacobson, if you do this already, then just ignore my comment, but do you put, in order to prevent the, multiple paragraphs of comments together, do you put like reviewer 1 said this, reviewer 2 said that? You do that already? That certainly would be helpful to the recipient, I think.
I'd have to actually look at it. I think that things are separated out, so there's at least dashes or something in between sets of comments.
Cool.
Anybody have problems with us continuing down this path? Any other?
I'll just make one closing comment, and that is we do a lot of things because it's the way we've always done them, not because anybody thinks it's a wonderful idea necessarily, although it's worked for us in the past, so we'll keep doing it. I'm perfectly happy to listen to constructive comments. The idea of publishing minutes is one of those that I think is probably a good idea and we ought to start doing. Minutes, meaning like we had a meeting and we accepted 7 talks, that kind of thing. So yeah, please keep this type of conversation going.
By the way, people should be aware that steering committee minutes are published. We meet every other Thursday, teleconference, and they're published on the order of a week later. You can just follow the chain from the NANOG website. Look at this.
Okay. Again, some of you who were at the newcomers meeting, and most of you who've been here at NANOG before know who I am. I wanted to start the meeting this evening by acknowledging someone who's not with us here at this meeting. Susan R. Harris has been a long-time NANOGger. She worked very early on with Elise, with Bill, with Craig, and certainly served as program committee chair for NANOG for about 6 years. Given some restructuring activities that occurred at Merit, Susan is no longer at Merit. She was a casualty of some of that restructuring. It would be very inappropriate for us to not acknowledge the long history that she's had and the great contributions, and will certainly be missed. So I applaud her. it's been some tough times, and I'm sure all of you working at large companies know exactly what I'm talking about. I want to also acknowledge, given the revolution, however we want to define the past 2 years for NANOG and Merit, the importance that we at Merit place upon the SC, the PC, and the LISADMINs. I think that our evolution, our charter, has made us all stronger, and I just want to recommit to all of you that Merit stands strongly behind the efforts of all of these folks and truly do appreciate their volunteerism on all of our behalfs. I want to acknowledge some of my Merit staff who are here. As you may have heard from our newcomers meeting, there is a revived energy at Merit to get Merit sort of back engaged with the NANOG community. And paying attendees, by the way, Mary McLaughlin from our networking division at Merit, she's our director. Brian Cashman, who is manager of our backbone engineering group, and Glenn Wolsey, who supports all of our DNS activities at Merit. It's really nice to know that we're here and we have support. The Merit staff back home in Ann Arbor that are watching us, hi everyone, and worrying about all of us since we left Friday morning. Brad Robertson, Jeff Tomaszewski, Jason Russell, who's not here with us this meeting but back home. Bert Rossi, who also serves on the program committee but had some other engagements back in Ann Arbor and couldn't come on site, and Rick Reinecke. So it's just an indication of the Merit commitment to these activities. All of these folks are engineers and have full-time jobs, but they're very actively working, troubleshooting the network and the systems that support everything that we're doing here. The staff on site, anybody here that, everybody who's working on site, just stand up for a second so everybody can see you. I want to say thank you to all of them. You guys don't know how many hours these folks put in. All of them very, very talented and have provided lots of new ideas to this meeting, especially in the video area. I want to thank our host, Rodney Jaffe. We can't say enough about how many times we tapped Rodney on the shoulder and said, hey, can you help us out? And he did it for us again. All these sponsors, again, NANOG happens because there is the Merit to pull us all together, certainly because of all of you coming here to the meeting, finding value, but these sponsors make it happen. They're really, really important. The break sponsors, the beer and gear sponsors, those are the sponsors before. A lot of these folks don't really spend real dollars necessarily out of their own pockets, but collaboratively together over their various expertise in the networking world make this meeting happen. These folks actually spend some money out of their pocket, so it's really important for us to always acknowledge them because that's what keeps the registration fee down and make it possible for us to have a meeting. I always like, before I get into the budget numbers, and I know you guys are really anxious to see them, to talk a little bit about some of the things that have happened since the last time we met in Dallas. There's a real attempt at this meeting to improve our broadcast options and the server behind the scenes. Lord Kirkmeyer, our video engineer from Merit, has been on site and has been working with a number of folks to improve the quality of service to our remote viewers. If you haven't been to the NANOG website, go check it out. Some real improvement there, we hope, and some ongoing work as well. We brought some improved video gear on site, improving again how we capture and broadcast the meeting and how we interface with the projection systems up front. We know that that's an ongoing kind of issue, but as you'll see in the budget and the way we structure the meetings, we don't put a $20,000 kind of item in the budget to do video quality or what I would call production quality services. So we're constantly trying to improve, but it's not a wholesale replacement. We're putting in place some additional networking monitoring tools. You'll see some work from Larry Blunt in that area, some things that we've learned working with colleagues over the past few meetings on monitoring the wireless gear. And of course, as many of you know, either from being on the PC SC or the mail list team, at Merit we underwent some organizational changes, and we came through them well. I think the organization is stronger, but it did take a little bit of time as we were getting ready for this meeting to also deal with some issues at home. I'm very, very excited. As I noted in my meeting in Dallas, we were searching for a new CEO at Merit, and we now have one. He starts July 10th or thereabout. His name is Don Welsh, and we're very excited. He will be hopefully joining us in our October meeting. Looking ahead, what do we got to do? At Merit, as soon as this meeting is over, we go back home and we get ready for the voting process. There's some web work that we need to do. We need to embrace the new charter, and we need to get ready for that process to kick it off and be able to support the activity that we come away from this meeting. We want to continue to improve the registration process. There's a lot of manual steps in the process, and in order to be lean and trim, there's some improvements that we want to make in our databases. We know that we need to improve our switchgear, the switchgear that we have in the closets that connect to the network. We've got some gear that comes out of our statewide network and some old gear, and we want to replace it. Anybody who's interested in donating some new switchgear, we're always open to that idea as well, as opposed to spending some dollars. But nevertheless, we know we've got to do that. And, excuse me, talk to David Gilbertson. He'll tell you. And then, of course, as soon as I get back and the management team, we prepare for the arrival of our new CEO. One of the things that we're working on, it's only a possibility. I was talking to Steve Feldman about this. It's another way of trying to be more efficient and automate the program selection process, the presenter process. Steve Feldman did a great job. If you're a program committee member and see how we go about supporting the program committee on his website. His authenticated website for the voting process for the program committee is just phenomenal. It's great. The problem or some of the delay is in that the presenters have to go through a filter at Merit to get their presentations into the website. And then there's another filter that goes in place for the presenters to get their presentations up onto the website. And we have some programmers back home at Merit to work at making some improvement between the way we do things and Steve's systems so that we have more automation for the presenters, trying to get people out of the middle of the process. I don't know if we'll have that in place for October or not, but it's certainly on the drawing board. I think that it's important for all of us to acknowledge that certainly at Merit, certainly in the regional networking arenas, and probably at a number of your companies, most of us are facing escalating costs. We see declining, flat, or slightly increasing revenue. It's certainly not the boom that it once was. At least we're certainly feeling that in the regional networking business that we're involved in. Because of that, all of us are striving to reduce costs and increase the revenues, trying to capitalize on the things that we do well, and eliminate things that perhaps we have been doing forever but don't need to do anymore to try to save some of the costs. We're always looking at salaries and general expenses, and we're always looking at ways to increase revenues to attract and retain our customers, which is the registration at these meetings, and to add value services to what we do. Some of the increased revenues at NANOG that we're thinking about is trying to make sure that there is a return on investment for our sponsors. We don't want NANOG, in talking with the steering committee in Dallas, to become a trade show. Certainly not. That's not what NANOG's all about. But recognizing that our sponsors play an important part in our budgeting mix, it's my job to continue to figure out how we can make it a return on investment for them to do so. How can this not be a trade show, but how can all of you go back to your companies, your marketing folks, and feel like it was worthwhile for you to spend $8,000 on a beer and gear, for instance? And again, I just don't believe that Merit is alone in this issue. And you'll see why I say what I've been saying. Here comes the numbers. This is the same format that you've seen in Dallas for our meeting before. We had $181,000 in revenue, $75,000 in salary. And again, this is not just one FTE, this is a number of people, and this is the meeting assignment for salary dollars. The non-salary expenses total $143,786 and are summarized below. These are expenses related to that meeting and some of the incremental costs of just doing things back home at Merit. Equipment, supplies, self-explanatory. Merit staff travel, what this is the staff travel to the meeting. Speakers, we didn't host any speakers, and we didn't have to pay for any non-Merit staff to travel to the meeting. Our hosting expenses, this is what we actually paid the hotel, the AV, the food, all that kind of thing, was $79,000. And Merit's G&A and systems overhead expenses assigned to that meeting were $47,000. When you get all said and done at the end of the day, when Carol Wadsworth and our accounting staff at Merit provided the numbers to us, we lost $37,000. Why don't we take them at the end, if that's okay? I can go back and forth to the slides. This is a projection, that I promised in terms of how we expect to close. If any of you aren't familiar with the university budget, our budget process goes from July 1 to June 30th. So we're in the process of preparing our closed-in numbers. We have presented this preliminary information to Merit's budget subcommittee. Merit's board will meet at the end of June, and we hope to get much closer to final numbers. Again, these are prediction numbers because this meeting isn't closed yet. We don't know what the bills are going to be. And it's my estimation to be conservative. I'd rather be surprised pleasantly that this meeting was a much bigger success than going into it. The revenue in total for the year, including this meeting, is projected at $676,540. And by the way, these numbers that we'll go through are all audited at the end of the process. Merit has an auditing firm, Plant Moran, and they actually conduct an audit. So if anyone is interested in some of those audited numbers, which if you want to validate these, we can provide them as well. Registration, I broke out the revenue just because a lot of you ask me questions often about how that revenue breaks down. So I wanted to give you a year-end close. The registration total, 402,870. That's the paying customers to come to the meeting. Our beer and gear sponsors for the year, 192,000. Our break sponsors, 30,000. And our sponsors, 51,670. Our sponsors in general is one. Aaron sponsors NANOG. Every year, Aaron contributes $50,000 to the production of our video services and our broadcast. So we actually have a contract, but I think it's really important that everyone understands from Aaron's point of view how important it is to everyone around the world to be able to see these meetings, and Aaron is providing support to the tune of $50,000 total to do that. It was $51,670 this year just because there were some additional expenses from our last October meeting, but generally it's $50,000. Our salary expenses in total, $173,225. Oh, didn't line up there, sorry. Our non-salary expenses totaled $567,510, and our they're all over the place, but they're summarized down there in the bottom. $7,440 on equipment, $36,678 on supplies, $38,678 on supplies. I'm sorry. Travel, $34,698. Hosting expenses, $285,528. And G&A and systems overhead, this is the hosting expenses applied to NANOG from Merit. And by the way, hosting or G&A and overhead expenses apply to all projects at Merit. So it's not just NANOG, but it applies to all the various projects under our budget. The balance I'm projecting, and I have to get our board comfortable, is that this year annually we lost $64,000. The FTE allocation to support all that we do last year is 2.25 FTE. Some of the assumptions I thought it important for you to understand as I go into FY07. Like all of you who deal with budgets, you have to sit back and you have to predict what you're going to do. What you'll see in the numbers is that there is about a 10K increase in revenue. I'm really being hopeful here that our situation from Dallas and San Jose will turn itself around and we'll see a 10K increase, and that we'll go back to the revenue numbers that we've seen last year. I based those revenue predictions on 3 meetings per year at about 400 attendees paying per meeting at $350 each. And again, you know, this is all variable because you all register at different times. Some of you are speakers, you don't pay at all, so I have to take some number, and I chose 400. Some number of beer and gear sponsors at $8,000 each. It varies depending on venues. Sometimes we can go with 8 beer and gear sponsors, sometimes we can go to 10. So it varies. The break sponsors, I'm hoping for 5. That's, again, being really, really optimistic that we're going to do a good job on marketing and that we're going to find important ways to try to get vendors here to help sponsor the break sessions. So that's really one of the challenging numbers when we put our budget together. And that Aaron continues to find it important to support these meetings. Expenses, the hotel is the hotel. Not much I can do there. Salaries, again, given the restructuring and our commitment to try to automate a number of activities, we expect to reduce the salary drain on NANOG. We also hope through our collaboration with Internet 2, with our in-house networking activities and maybe sponsorship from all of you, that we can reduce our supplies and equipment budget by $25K. I think what we have done at Merit is just assume that we had to pay for everything, and we forgot to come and ask some of our partners if there's a piece of equipment or another way in which they can sponsor. So you can see I'm really marketing here, folks. Sure? Absolutely. I'm sorry. Chris made the suggestion that Merit should put on the website the kind of equipment and donations it might be looking for so that you all may be able to help us more effectively. For NANOG related. Sorry, Chris. You weren't going to let me take that too far, huh? For NANOG related activities, and I think it's a great idea. I was simply saying that I think oftentimes at Merit we've moved into a mode of thinking that we have to do everything ourselves, buy everything ourselves, and we forget to simply ask for participation. And so you'll see some of that change coming forward. And we also know, just in general, that some of the overhead expenses at Merit have gone up. And we expect those to be about 10K higher. So here's my predictions for 07. Again, the revenue predictions going up a little higher, 686. I'm predicting the registration at 410. Again, you'll see some of these numbers very similar to our 06 close. Again, our style is to try to be conservative and not overly optimistic. Beer and gear, 192. Breaks, 34. And again, our sponsorship at 50. Our salaries come down to 130. And again, this is a collective group of people that we buy salary time from. So it's not just one engineer, one Carol Wadsworth, one Don Kahn, but it's a collection of a number of people. Equipment, 8265. Supplies, 12,000. Merit staff travel, 24. Although I haven't budgeted it in there on the line item, we know that if there is a need to support speakers and non-Merit staff travel, we'll find a way to make that happen. But I just haven't put it in as a line item. And our hosting expenses are $300,000. It's just impossible to know if we're going to get away with a cheap venue at under 100, like at 79 or 89, or in some hotels we've paid 120. So we use an average of 100 each. And our G&A and systems overhead at Merit is 211, netting a balance of only a loss of 641. And I think that all of this is important to note, that while we're asking, and I'll certainly entertain all of your questions, support from all of you, we're trying to keep the registration numbers down. But it's also important at a 501c3 nonprofit organization like Merit to make sure that we're dealing with cost recovery activities, because there really isn't another way to pay for Merit, or to, pay for NANOG at Merit other than NANOG being able to be cost recovery. And again, these are just some information on the future meeting sites. Randy's already shared much of this with you. Again, we're going October 6th and 10th, 6th through the 10th, with Aaron in St. Louis. Those are our sponsors. Joe is working on the first week of February in Toronto. And sorry, I was just listing locations. Sorry, Joe. Good point. And the fourth week of May and first and second week of June, Josh is working on Miami for us. And we're working with Aaron right now on the fall 07 venue, and there's a couple predictions on where we may go there. Oh, that's when we arrive. I'm sorry. It's our going day. It's actually that Sunday, so that would be the 8th. So I can go back. We can go back to Dallas. We can go back to 06 or go back to 07. But I would. We don't want to go back to Dallas. I certainly welcome all questions.
I think I can save you $211,000 in one move. Why do you need to be hosted at the University of Michigan?
It's not a hosting expense from the University of Michigan, Bill. It has nothing to do with the University of Michigan. These are Merit expenses. This is the overhead expense for Merit to pay the University of Michigan for doing our accounting, and for Merit to pay its own rent, for Merit to pay its own insurance bills. It's really not a tax passed to us from the university. You could think of the university's hosting expense passed to Merit is just another business expense of any company. Those are really, truly overhead expenses that Merit has to pay. Pay. The telephone, share of the president, share of our administrative staff, share of our rent, our insurance, legal fees, all those things that go in to make up G&A at a company.
Could you go back to Dallas? I guess a couple of things jump out at me. Hosting is damn expensive. The hotels just cost an enormous amount of money. I don't know that there's any solution to that unless we could find some way of going back to a university that could handle 400 folks. Are we assuming that's just not physically possible?
It's very possible. The question Bill asked, again, is one that we struggled with the past 2 years in trying to come up with a joint meeting with Internet 2. Internet 2 meetings, the joint tech meetings, are always on a campus venue. This is, again, just because we've always done it this way kind of answer. Our view in the response that we heard from all of you, that it was really important to come up with a venue where your lodging was in the same place or very, 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 very close to the meeting hall. And you can't really get those in a university situation. But on your survey, on your survey, it's a very valid. You'll see on the survey that we put together. We're asking, and by the way, Ren Provo helped us with the survey and the steering committee. I really appreciate all the comments back, because we're asking questions on the survey about where would you like to have a meeting? East Coast, West Coast, in a hotel, at a university. The more information you can provide back to us in your survey helps us plan venues.
I'm Chris Malater with Broadwing again. The question that I'd have going back to is if we were going to move to a university for the sessions themselves would be how much would it cost to create a busing scenario where we're busing people back and forth from the conference hotel all day? Is that going to be cheaper by getting space donated from the university? That's a lot of bus for $80,000, but how much of the expenses are still going to be there? I mean, depends on what city you're in, but a lot of times big venues and colleges are union just like the hotel. So.
Yeah, I really haven't looked into it, so I don't have a good answer to say that it would be cheaper on a university or not. I can tell you that hopefully what we would avoid on a university campus from what we're finding to be a reality in hotel situations is the cost associated with access to their wiring infrastructure. All of you have a really great business. Everybody wants to provide great internet connectivity out of their hotel meeting rooms and out of their convention centers. But when folks like us come in to rent those rooms and really don't want to buy internet connectivity from them, just use their wires, you wouldn't believe how much they charge for that these days. They charge a bunch. It's all over the place, but they charge a bunch to use hotel wiring. And what we would avoid, I hope, on university campuses is all of that kind of expense. So there could be trade-offs. I mean, you might pay a little bit more, Chris, for buses getting you here and there, but we may save on some of the infrastructure cost. But the way in which our meeting would be set up would be very different. I mean, it'd just be different, just different.
Rob Seasterminder.net. I'm heartened to see that the event horizon is a little bit further out if you go to the scheduling in advance. But one thing that I have learned from my friends who do sci-fi conventions year after year is that if you have stuff that is scheduled a couple of years out, and I realize that there are constraints involving finding sponsors that far out, but if you have stuff that's scheduled a couple of years out with some flexibility where for a certain amount of time, say up until like a year out, the hotel can move you a couple of weeks either direction to stuff that you agree with ahead of time. That really gives you some negotiating leverage, and the hotel stuff is completely based on what you manage to negotiate out. So the longer in advance you have to be able to plan it, the better your negotiating position.
Absolutely. We knew a year ago that it was important not only budgetarily, but because of all of your travel planning and the program committee, that we needed to try to get ahead of the curve of venue selection. And we know, because we get a lot of inquiry from a lot of the same professional conferences and meetings that you all go to, that everyone is sort of held hostage until we announce our dates. So we understand that some of our sister organizations, sister meetings, really want to know when we're going to have NANOG so that they can schedule their meetings around it. And if we can't schedule, then we're also responding to them and then also further limited in our date selection and location. So we have to turn it around. There's certainly a commitment to do so, and support from the steering committee. They hear me talk every 2 weeks about where we're at, what we know, and where we're going. But truthfully, in order for us to get ahead of where we want to have meetings 18 months out, it takes a commitment from the community to help Merit host. Okay? It's really, really important for folks to step up and be willing to help provide transit for these meetings. It's not an insignificant cost if we have to pay for it. And I don't know where all of you have transit. I could guess, but you have to be the ones to help provide transit, and you have to be our eyes and ears on site to help us set up these venues. Rodney, do you want to talk a little bit about what you went through to help us find San Jose?
While Rodney's on his way up, let me just say that's why I brought this up in this forum, because you and I have had this discussion on the side. But it's important to make it clear just what kind of commitment we need and how far in advance we need the commitment from our friends in the backbone providing industry and what have you, that this is something where it can make or break the expense for the actual facility by a factor of probably 20-30%, depending on the kind of negotiation leverage that you have.
Absolutely.
So I'd rather discuss that in my little presentation, my intro tomorrow. I've been working on some slides to show you what was involved. But I'll tell you that I think there are 4 or 5 totally separate companies and individuals involved in getting packets from here to the internet with things that you just wouldn't believe because of the rules of the facility. So I'll show you. I'd rather show you tomorrow morning when I do the presentation there. But it wasn't easy, and it's probably the single biggest task that a host has, is to solve that problem.
And Rodney said to me, even though this one has been challenging, hey, Betty, if you give me some more advance notice, I'll help you out. Just don't tap me on the shoulder 10 weeks before we're supposed to go someplace. So Rob's point is well taken. The further out we want to get these meetings planned, which I'm committed to, and Merritt's certainly willing to take on the lion's share of the hotel contract and the logistics and even providing hardware, because we're going to be working with all of our colleagues out in the room to try to get some new hardware. That's not the issue. It's getting someone to step up and be committed to be a host, to providing transport, and to working with us on selecting a venue.
Randy, as I hand the mic over to Rand, I just want to say there's another alternative, which is look at what it would take to budget it to just what we've been calling self-host, which is, we're going to meet in Biloxi at this hotel, and we're paying, and what that does to admission costs. Biloxi probably be no.
I think we were vibing because I'm Ren Provo still. I think we were vibing because RIPE really does it well with having a known location, so that they've negotiated all the wire agreements, the expenses for the ballroom, the hotel needs. All of the people who are coming in are comfortable with what they could get for hotels if they need a cheaper budget hotel within the region. Why not make one of the meetings in a standard spot that we go to every year, so it's pre-plumbed and you don't have to do the poor Randy or the poor Rodney calls that I get where he's trying to recreate the internet. But then you have alternative hotels that you can learn about that are right there. But everybody who has to come and do all the AV work, they know the footprint, they know the fees, and then they can work out longer term deals with the hotel because it's recurring budget for the hotel.
Absolutely. I'm all for it, Ren. I think it's a great idea to be able to return to the same locations. And until Josh and Joe stepped forward to help us out with the next 2 venues, that's exactly what I was doing. Where have we been that it was easy for Merit staff, or easier, and where did we achieve the greatest registration or revenue target? Where did people like to go? We have that information. I'm certainly beginning to compile it, but it means then that you're still having to go to a host to help you bring in transit. So it's changing the model a little bit. Where do we want to go? Where have we been successful at? And then going to that host to work with us, as opposed to waiting for the host to come to us.
If by host you are restricting it to transit, if this community can't come up with transit to reasonable locations, I think we have bigger problems.
No, I'm not. Good point, Randy. I'm just meaning the host is the one who has to go find the transit.
One of the things that I want to say in terms of hosting, I probably get 60 or 70 emails after word gets out that I'm hosting, giving me preferences of where people want to go. It's really amazing. The easiest thing for me would have been to do this one in Phoenix. No one knew the temperature would be 112 degrees, but ignoring that, I had emails from all kinds of people saying to me, I wanted to be in the Bay Area, I wanted to be in DC, wanted to be in Chicago. It's real difficult. I don't know if there's a mechanism that will allow people to sort of step forward and say, if you had it in these cities, I would come, which may make it easier for people to say, hey, I'll give you commitments. If you have it in one of these 6 cities, I'll commit to come to the next NANOG. Then at least we can budget. But it's real tough choosing a city and then hoping that enough people will turn up to pay the costs. It would be nice if there was a mechanism to solve that.
One suggestion from having been involved with hosting a couple of times is you may want to really consider separating out the idea of being the transit sponsor from being the host, because there are a finite number of facility-based providers who can really easily kind of $0, 1 month sort of local loop provide as transit, whereas the pool of people who can sponsor is a different pool, and in a lot of cases it's pretty tough to get one of those facilities-based providers to give those people. They may not have the people, but they may be willing to give the transit and vice versa. So if you could sort of separate out the transit sponsorship from the hosting, that might make your life a little bit easier.
Absolutely. We're very flexible and co-hosting and working through the arrangements. Probably the separate from the transit issue and the volunteer issue is the eyes and ears. The ability to try to keep Merit's travel budget is very low. We're not spending a lot of money to send people out to these hotel venues to check out the location. What happens is Carol Wadsworth, David Gilbertson, and Betty Burke get on an airplane and see this place for the first time Friday before all of you start arriving. And some of you are probably here even before us. So one of the big things that we really, really have to have in our hosting relationship, if we want to keep some of these budget issues to a minimum, is somebody who can go to these hotels and work through some of the initial issues with the wiring closets and setting up the room venues, just knowing how NANOG works to be able to be our eyes and ears on site.
I would think that in terms of locations that we were looking for, I mean, if you're looking at, I think that there's a couple common denominators. I think that having direct flights to most cities in the country, let alone a lot of worldly destinations, is probably a good thing. Countries, yes. I would say that temperature has something to do with it, which goes back to the flipping the June and February meetings would be really ideal. And just having an interesting city with stuff to do, lots of activities. I think that those 3 things probably play the most into, in terms of looking at your meeting host and location, what people would be, interested in doing.
And that's true. We look at some of those issues, but one of the other things that is a factor, it came up in discussion earlier in terms of hotel rooms, but one of the things that we're committed to at Merit, because it was the message we heard back from the community over time, was that we need to try to keep the room rate manageable. And so certainly if we go to certain parts of the country, we can see a room rate approach 220, 225, and we automatically kind of shudder at that and try to negotiate around the 150 rate. So, if you all tell us that room rate, night rate, isn't a big issue, it also removes some of the logistics that we deal with.
Mehmet from IXPR, as many of you know. I want to touch on a different point about the NANOG meetings, and why not, instead of having 3 meetings a year, having 2 meetings? And if you get back to 2007, maybe this may help to reduce some cost and have more people attending to the meetings, because since it is more rare, it will be more attractive for people and maybe easier to travel for more people. And I guess Randy is angry.
No, not at all. It's one of my foils is that discussion and some of the elements of it, but I think that has some overlap with this one, but is a different discussion. The problems that he's hitting are mostly independent of that. Transit providers, reasonably priced hotels, et cetera, et cetera. Most people's management is not going to care whether NANOG has 2 or 3 meetings a year when you walk in telling them the hotel is going to cost $250.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true. But if you have 2 meetings and arrange those times in some times where are not high season for the local hosts, then it may be easier, because when you have 3 meetings, it will either one. And Betty knows very well that I have had very hard times when I was trying to get something in Puerto Rico, and basically it's really hard to work with when it's 3 meetings and all the time it's like overbooked. And basically I just wanted to point that out. Maybe 2 meetings is the way to go.
My understanding of the situation in trying to arrange the meeting in Puerto Rico wasn't whether it was 2 or 3 meetings, is that the initial attempt was to put it in high season.
Yeah.
So, in fact, therefore, a stupid engineer would say if there were 6 meetings a year, you would have a greater probability of picking one that was in low season.
That's true.
Cheap shot.
Are you turning away beer and gear sponsors? Do you artificially limit the number of beer and gear sponsors?
Yes and no. How's that? It's beer and gear sponsors are really determined by the venue, how many we can fit, and making sure that we have room for the sponsors to have people visit them. You know, if you crowd a room, then it's really difficult for us to look that sponsor in the face and say, you know, sorry, it was so crowded, people didn't stay. So Carol is pretty careful to make sure that she looks at the venue, the information that she gets from the hotel, in putting a limit on beer and gear. Sometimes when we've been in a venue, we can only get 6. In recent times there was some venues we could only get 6 beer and gear sponsors comfortably in the space, and food for all of you, beer for all of you. Other times we've had 12. So it varies, Bill. And that's why it's also very hard just in our budgeting numbers to say it's an exact science, because it differs venue to venue.
Sometimes you have to avoid having too much beer, but
The amount of beer. Gotcha.
other stuff on the subject?
Just that I thought the objection, Betty, would have been that you don't want this to be a trade show sort of thing. And I'm looking at the number that you had up there, and you're getting whatever $6,000 or $8,000 per beer and gear sponsor. That seems to me like a very good source of revenue to go down and tap. And I don't suspect the folks that attend NANOG would care so much if there are 6 versus 12 beer and gear sponsors, as long as the beer is flowing.
No, absolutely. Bill makes a good point. It was an observation that I raised with the steering committee when we were in Dallas, looking at some of these numbers, and the call that I put out, and the response that we got with our break sponsors. We don't want it to be a trade show. On the other hand, if we want to try to maintain a viable registration fee that is somewhat flat, we've got to deal with the issue of where easy money is. And I don't mean to say it that way, but it's really in the marketing effort. Where can we get a return on investment for all of your companies to be able to have access at this meeting?
Okay, it was helpfully switched off. Mike Hughes. Okay, just a bit of reverse psychology with the sponsorship. You effectively know how much money you need to make from sponsorship in a meeting. If you've got fewer slots for a sponsor, put the sponsorship up, because there's exclusivity there. There's only 6 slots. Cisco are less likely to be able to go against Juniper if everybody else has filled the slots up quickly and they're paying for the exclusivity and not having to stand in front of their competitors.
It's certainly an option, something to think about, but we have tried to keep the sponsorship neutral, keep merit out of the mix, and it's sort of a first come, first serve. And so we're not pushing one vendor over another with that kind of model. Sorry. I missed it.
Well, I'm not saying kill the neutrality. What I'm saying is you know how much you need to make out of the sponsorship. You have that many slots. As many slots as you fill, you divide the sponsorship total by that, rather than it being, every sponsorship amount is like equal for everybody in that meeting. So if there's, say 12 slots, it's $8,000. If there's 6, it goes up to say $10,000, or well, the math doesn't work. Whatever the math, however the math works.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Certainly, that's something to consider. I can only respond by saying that some of our sponsors like the predictability. It's easy to go back to their companies and say, I know exactly what it's going to take to sponsor a beer and gear session at NANOG, and so as soon as this meeting closes, they're sending email right away to take the spots. It's a little bit harder on the brakes to fill up that real estate. But I see where you're going in terms of dividing up the cost. I'm just not sure it would help with the predictability factor.
Betty, Aviva Garrett from Juniper. Would you consider a prorated cost based on the revenue of the company, so that a company like Juniper or Cisco would pay more than a smaller company, maybe just a couple $1,000s? Because, just for going from $24,000 a year to $30,000 a year for Juniper is probably not that much of a difference, but for a smaller company, it might make a little bit of a difference.
We've thought about that, certainly.
I'd like to sponsor.
See, that was my problem. That was my problem. Actually, but a similar take on that, it was an idea that we had back home at Merit was an annual subscription, an annual sponsorship. Instead of looking at it as a per venue, but putting together a marketing plan that would say if Juniper wanted to sign up for all the meetings and secure their place, what might the cost be?
Point of order. Would people rather go late or drop some of the other tasty items we have on the menu? No problem.
Buddy hasn't eaten all day, but
So another interesting problem, the way that it's set up, is basically the costs are basically fixed for you to attend. It's generally 350 or 400 depending on when you register, but the costs for you to actually implement it are variable, as you said. Sometimes you go to a hotel and it's the hosting fees are cheap, and sometimes you go to a hotel and they want a lot of money. If instead of picking one hotel and sticking to it, perhaps picking, we have these 3 hotels, and this hotel is the the January hotel, and this is the June hotel, and you can then decide, well, we keep returning to this hotel, and we know what we need to do to make the economics work in this hotel, because basically now every time you come in, you have to reinvent the wheel. You have a new business model. You have, this one has a bigger venue, this one has a smaller venue, more beer and gear, less beer and gear. So each time around, the venue is exactly the same, and what needs to work there. You could say, we need this many attendees, and we know we can expect them because it's in the same location, and some people will always go if it's in a given location. So
certainly helps. It certainly helps us in planning, and I think it really could help with the budget predictability, but it is a piece of information, a data point that we need from all of you. How do you feel about going back to the same locations? Again, it's different, not saying that it's bad, but one of the things that, at least since I've been involved with NANOG, is versatility, being able to go from coast to coast, or making it more accessible, I guess, to geographic locations. So if we go to the same places, we lose some of that. I don't have a point one way or the other. You guys got to weigh in.
I know you're not crazy about making. I know you're not crazy about making this a true. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just wait a sec. Yeah. Other regional meetings. Joe Abley, Affiliates. Other regional meetings that are smaller than and more recent than NANOG have sponsorship structures which allow companies to say, I want to give $50,000 a year to this meeting, or $25,000 a year, whatever, and you can list me as a platinum sponsor all the time for all these meetings. And for some of those meetings, that gives them a reliable revenue stream around which they can plan things with a lot less stress, a lot less meeting-to-meeting sort of panic, trying to get the numbers right. if some company came to Merit and said, I'm a big company, I would like to give you $50,000 and be a platinum sponsor, would Merit say yes?
We said yes to Aaron.
I think that's a great idea. And furthermore, another thing you should consider, a few times in the past, companies... Sorry? Oh, I'm Dan Goldman. Nice to meet you. A few times in the past, companies have wanted to do, in the evening, and especially now that the evenings are free, hospitality suites or some kind of party at NANOG. Yeah, well, Yahoo did it, but folks have also wanted to do hospitality suites in the actual hotel itself. And in the past, of course, there hasn't been a totally acceptable way to do that, and there have been bad feelings. But keep in mind that most conferences, from my experience, can get between $9,000 and $16,000 of revenue from a hospitality suite with very little actual outlay because they're paying for their own food and beverage. So just a thing to consider in terms of revenue.
We've discussed this, Randy Bush, we've discussed this in the steering committee. Two things is, number one, we have a base thing that if you are at all associating your thing with NANOG, it must be open to all. In other words, no closed private parties, because NANOG should be open to all. But the second is the question of how commercial we want to go. And that's an open one. And, you know, one of the things that's causing us not to go down those paths as much as we might is it is currently working. This is like the internet, you know. It actually seems to function. Your packets are getting there. So, where we look at the budget and we look at people's pockets and so on and so forth, you know, we're at the edge. I don't think, or this may be entirely false. We, Merit and the steering committee at least, have a perception, I think the program committee, have a perception that going over the $350 level, going to $450, $500 is something we'd be very cautious about. Right? Maybe we're wrong. Pardon? Right. It should be in the surveys.
Randy.
Yeah. Sylvie's points put in the survey.
Yeah. Jared Mach, NTT America. I was actually just going to mention what, you know, or comment and say, what about bumping the registration fee by something relatively nominal, by $25 or something like that? You put that across a number of people over 3 meetings a year. That helps stabilize some of these numbers, especially when we're seeing deficits for several meetings and projected deficits through 2007.
How many people here are price sensitive? The registration fee. Right. Pardon? Marty, what? Yeah. No, I mean price sensitive in the sense that, you know, you'd have a real problem if it went up by $100. I understand, but okay. How many people would have problems if the hotel went up $100 a night? By the way, there's a hidden tension there that hasn't been mentioned, is there are locations where we get a lot more people, like the Bay Area, like the D.C. area. They all tend to have high hotel rates.
Rob Seastrom again. As somebody who goes back and forth between being an independent and then getting hired into the organization, and then the organization gets sold, lather, rinse, repeat, it really depends on what phase I'm in, how price sensitive I am. If I'm just passing stuff through to my employer, you know, I sort of don't care $350 versus $500, and neither does my employer, because my employer has a lot higher cash flow than I do personally. If I'm a consultant, I actually care a lot more about that. And you know, I think that I took a quick peek around the room while people had their hands up, and I only saw a few people, but among the people I saw are people who tend to be sort of in the same boat. So, you know, if stuff went up by $100 a night for hotel, obviously I'd be a lot more upset.
Jared Mach. I was just suggesting like $25 or $50. I wasn't trying to go much, but I was trying to bring that up just as an issue in general. If it was something a little bit lower, that does make an overall difference in the long run.
And there's-
How many times are you talking about repeating that? If you take a look at the historical data for NANOG attendance, it used to be a lot less.
Oh, no question, it's been a lot less, but a lot of things used to cost a lot less. Merit is, as you can see, just from the fact that we're having this discussion, we take very seriously not increasing the registration rate. And we are very committed to dealing with the other part of the model, which is the sponsorship. You know, trying to find creative ways to look for sponsors and still not create a marketing meeting out of NANOG, you know, a trade show. So it's a delicate balance. There has been, there's no question, from the early days of the joint texts and to when Bill was chair of NANOG, I think we raised the registration fee 3 years ago. The increased cost of venue selection and the increased cost of just producing NANOG went up. There was just no two ways around it. It used to be when I first came to my first NANOG meeting, a few people sitting at the back of the room, and that's what we called our technical table. You know, one little broadcast over the M-bone and a screen and a room this size. It's a whole lot easier to put together some of those kinds of meetings than what we do today. So it's just a larger production, and we're price sensitive. And we're open to looking at the different models, but it's still a budget reality at the end of the day. And it takes a partnership. The issue, I think that this discussion tonight is so useful because it's truly the message that I hope we all go away with is that NANOG is not in trouble. It is not in trouble. There are some financial issues. There's no question. We all face them. There is a commitment by Merit's board of directors and Merit management staff to preserve the reserve that NANOG has to cover these kinds of issues. So it's not in trouble. It's not like NANOG is going to end or Merit's board is going to shutter because there's some red numbers. Because there is a reserve to help us cover contract languages and allow Merit to take the risk on your behalf to schedule those venues. When we schedule hotels and sign contracts, Merit is taking a risk on all of you to show up. It isn't cheap to sign a hotel contract. You all know that. We're doing that, and we're making that commitment to try to get these venues out in advance so you can have predictability. But it's a partnership. It only works when Merit can count on all of you to also look at these budget numbers, work with us on sponsorships, and be aware of the balance in the registration fees.
Can I go back, Chris Malater, can I go back to the venue selection?
Sure.
Okay.
I
So
really want to go to Miami in February.
no.
I got it.
I'm going to leave that alone. I've made it a couple of times. Anyway, if we were to go follow the right model or go further than that and go to all fixed locations, I would not be a supporter of going to all 3 meetings in all 3 permanent fixed locations. Though that might help reduce costs, I just think that a lot of the pleasure of going to NANOG is that we do get to hit multiple destinations. I don't, however, see a problem with having one destination as our home base of source. The question that I would pose back to the room is, how would we then decide where our home base would be?
You know, it's a very interesting set of questions, and this is exactly why there are 2 or 3 new questions on the survey simply dealing with this issue of where and how often, and have you tell us. You know, we only really get a sense of what the community wants either by the trend in registration. Oh, that was a great place because we had 500 people there. Oh, that was a bad place because, and then we have to factor in a number of other data points, and we're just really making some subjective analysis. The important place for the community to tell Merit and the steering committee and the program committee, because they're a part of this as well, is what do you want? Where do you guys want to go? What would you prefer? And what do you think about the registration fee? That's the survey document. It's online, and truly, it's a very serious process. As soon as those surveys are tabulated, the information is shared, certainly with merit management, with the steering committee, the program committee, and the results are placed on the website for all of you. Thanks. Anyone who wants to speak about any of these other issues, you know where I'm at. Come find me. You're welcome. Thank you.
This is an assortment. What I'm going to do is scroll through them quick. Sorry. Oh, God. No way. Go for it.
So whoever brought that up, I'll have a word with you after the. Let me steal your seat here if I can. If you'll bear with me a minute, folks, while I try to make this work. This is amazing. This worked on the first try. Everyone hear me okay? Okay, I'm Rob Seastrom. I'm doing the presentation here for the mailing list committee. We originally thought that Chris Malater, our chair, wouldn't be here today. So I went ahead and set this all up. This is really briefly what we're going to go over here. We're going to update on list committee membership, recap the process flow for those of you who were at the last presentation. There's nothing new here. If you want to catch 40, that's fine. Old business, we have some AUP stuff that's in play. List statistics, posting modification request overview. That's a nice way to say warning people. And then lastly, we'll entertain any questions that people have. So the present committee, if everyone who's in the room who's on the committee can stand up, please. I saw Sue Joyner back there, but she is, yep, there she is. All the way in the back, that's Sue. This is Chris, and I guess Steve Wilcox isn't in the room. He's a smart man. So process flow. It's really pretty straightforward. If someone sends email to the list and we think it's a violation of the AUP, we'll send them mail. And the steering committee is authorized to make changes to the AUP per NANOG's charter. So for one-offs, we just send a nice note to people asking them, pointing them at the AUP and explaining our concern. If there's a problem that keeps repeating itself, or if the request is met with hostility or whatever, we have a discussion, and maybe there's an official warning sent outlining specifically what's wrong and saying that, if the activity continues, specific actions will be taken. One of the things, this is something that can actually move along very quickly. We've had situations where we said, gee, we'd really appreciate it if you wouldn't drop F-bombs on the NANOG mailing list, and the response is, well, yeah, well, F you. And, well, at that point, F you make me is not really a good thing to say in that sort of situation, if you find yourself in that situation. So at that point, things sort of go down, progress from the informal, gee, we would like you to modify your behavior, to not on the list anymore relatively quickly. So
There is a we'll have more on that in a minute. There's a pending AUP edition that was discussed at the last meeting, was sent to NANOG Futures. The feedback was minimal, but was overwhelmingly supportive among the people who actually, I think someone said fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, stuff like that, to the suggestion. So basically, we would like people to not use challenge response whitelisting software like TMDA when they are subscribing to the NANOG mailing list. If somebody does that, they are subject to being removed from the mailing list until they figure out how to have mailing list traffic bypass that sort of filter. Pretty much everybody seemed to think that this was a good idea. We believe, as the mailing list committee, that the ball is in the steering committee's court right now for the actual saying, yes, we bless this, we're going to have point number 8 on the AUP that says don't do that. There is another proposed addition to the AUP that came out of a breakfast meeting that we had with the steering committee folks at the last meeting on Tuesday, and it was due to our fault and dropping the ball that this didn't get into play on the NANOG Futures mailing list. So there is perceived to be a requirement for some framework for making emergency changes to the list if there is a really bad situation that threatens the stability of the mail servers, or stuff being disclosed that shouldn't be, like people sending out password file lists from compromised hosts or something like that. None of this stuff is outside the realm of possibility, and we would hope that people would just use good discretion in those circumstances. But if that were to happen, and for whatever reason the appropriate quorum of people from the mailing list committee were not around, this provides a framework for temporarily suspending privileges or posting privileges pending some sort of review. And we will go ahead and forward that off to the NANOG Futures mailing list, although we solicit discussion at the end of this presentation about that particular proposal. There was another piece that was sort of a trail on to the TMDA discussion, and there was widespread support for it, but it wasn't what you would call consensus, because of concern expressed by a lot of people that folks are sometimes required to subscribe and post only from their work accounts, and they're stuck with things like Exchange that don't handle vacation messages properly. For people who aren't familiar with this problem, stuff that sends vacation messages should not send vacation messages to email that comes in with the precedence of bulk. That's your clue that it's mailing list email, and it's just stupid to send back something as a response to somebody who posts to NANOG saying that you're on vacation. They probably don't care. So we can discuss this further during the Q&A period, but it seemed that we didn't have anything approaching universal support for this as an AUP edition. So I think it may be dead unless people think that it really bears pushing it forward. So I've got some statistics for you tonight. We've had 2,899 messages posted by far fewer than that number of people, out of a total user population of 8,012. If you take a look, the traffic statistics are kind of uneven. It looks like as the weather got a little bit better into April and May, people were doing things other than posting to NANOG with their spare time. We don't have the membership broken down as per month, although we don't believe that it's membership flux that's causing this difference in the number of people posting, because that 8,012 number is pretty similar to the one that we saw at the last meeting. Pardon? I just said that. I believe that it is a reflection of the fact that the weather is getting better and people are outside and doing things with their spare time other than posting to NANOG. If you have other ideas as to what it might be, I would be happy to hear your hypotheses. So here's things broken down just a little bit more. 8,012 subscribers to NANOG. For those of you who don't know about this, there are other mailing lists that are ancillary to NANOG. NANOG is the main discussion list. NANOG Post is a mailing list which nobody ever posts to. It's a mailing list that membership in it allows you to post to the NANOG mailing list. There's also one called NANOG Digest, which rolls up periodically the post. I believe it's daily, the posts to the NANOG mailing list. There are 1,183 subscribers out of a total of 8,012 on NANOG Post, which is to say that the vast majority of people who are NANOG subscribers can post to it. 1,322 who read NANOG Digest. NANOG Announce is for people like Steve and I guess Randy, you post to NANOG Announce sometimes, right? It's for call for papers, an announcement that the conference is going to happen and stuff like that. There's no chatter on it. Yes, the NANOG mailing list itself is a subscriber to NANOG Announce. The NANOG Futures mailing list, that's for discussion of where we're going with a lot of this stuff, 192. We probably ought to have more people subscribe to that because it's your future, it's your community, it's our community. So total messages, and this is just for the NANOG mailing list, again, we're 2,899. I don't have stats for NANOG Futures off the top of my list, and NANOG Digest would be fairly similar to the number of days that it passed. So breaking down month by month, we had in January through June, in January, 694 messages, which resulted in 2 warnings and 1 ban. This is the ban that was discussed in the February meeting, so it's not new news. 665 messages in February with 5 warnings and 0 bans. 670 messages in March with 6 warnings and 0 bans. In April, 453 messages, 1 warning, 0 bans. In May, 399 messages, no warnings, no bans. And in June, 18 messages so far, 0 warnings and 0 bans. So there's the summary. 14 warnings, 1 person who had their posting privileges removed, and no threads that required intervention. So what about all these warnings? What are people getting warned about? Well, there's a lot of people that we we're all human too on the mailing list committee. There's a lot of people that we may not like personally. There are people that discuss topics that we don't like to see on the list. There's just stuff that we find annoying, and we don't complain about that. We swallow that, suck it up, and only complain, only warn about actual violations of the AUP. So the AUP is available online for your perusal at your leisure. There are 7 points to it. They're here on the screen. Discussion will focus on Internet operational and technical issues as described in NANOG's charter. Postings of issues inconsistent with the charter are prohibited. Postings to multiple mailing lists are discouraged. Postings that include foul language, character assassination, and lack of respect for other participants are prohibited. Blatant product marketing is unacceptable. Postings of political, philosophical, and legal nature are discouraged. Postings to lists must be made using real identifiable names and addresses rather than aliases. So you're probably wondering how this all breaks down. Well, it turns out that although there, from time to time there are these red herrings on the first 3, from time to time the discussion gets a little bit heated, and we talk with people about not being rude to their colleagues. From time to time somebody posts a call for papers for some other conference, or if you want tickets to FubarCon, why don't you send me mail? We talk to people about that from time to time, but the vast majority of what we talk with people about is, gee, we'd really rather that you posted using your real name, not some sort of alias. So the typical warning email goes something like this. Hi, Joe Fubar.
please take a moment to read the NANOG mailing list AUP. Here's the URL, and with particular attention to whatever item we're concerned about. And we would really appreciate it if you would honor our AUP by only, whatever, fill in the blank. Are there any questions? At the risk of outing somebody, there was somebody who posted with something like Steve Nanog to the mailing list, and I send in my mail that on the off chance that your last name really is Nanog, you should probably get in touch with the program committee about presenting at the next conference. Any further questions? I figured there would be a lot of hot discussion about either this one or this one. All righty then. Randy, you want to come up and keep on rolling?
This is one we haven't discussed, which is any subjects you wish to hear about that you're not hearing about at NANOG? Pardon? How do you know what's rejected? Good question. Possibly that's an interesting question in the sense of the minutes might say, hey, we shot, 2 QoS talks and 15 researchers.
As I said, I don't have a complete in my head, but we tend to reject talks for a couple of reasons. First one is that they're widely inappropriate for this forum, i.e. a sales talk. I don't recall any of those this time around, which is a good thing. Another time we'll reject things is when we have a lot of talks on a very similar topic, and we just don't want to overwhelm the program with it. The only place where we had that this time was in tutorials, where we had, I think, 3 or 4 all about MPLS, and we chose the one that we thought was the best and stuck that in the program. That's not to say that the others were bad, it's just that we had to pick one and did. Oftentimes there's something that we think isn't polished enough, needs some work, so we'll send that back with request to polish it and resubmit it. Sometimes we'll make it conditional, sometimes we won't. Subjects. There are no specific limits on subjects. If it's at all relevant to the NANOG community, we consider it at least. What subjects were rejected? Okay, some tutorials on MPLS. And those are the ones I can remember. I know there were others, and I'd have to go back through my list to see. There was one tutorial on IPv6 that was not accepted this time.
But good question implied, which is you don't know what's rejected, you don't know what you might like from it. The PC minutes, we kind of discussed. Anybody have more on that? Should the reviews be signed? I think we discussed that. Oh, here's one we didn't discuss. We discussed it in the steering committee, as I said, and came to some conclusions. But does anybody have input on how we deal with the press? No, it's Joe, not Mike.
Joe Provo. Is Paul Ferguson the press? I.e., what is the definition?
There are, that's a tough one because it's not clear, as far as I know, it has not been determined well in case law whether that's the press, although it looks like it is becoming so. But we were literally approached by somebody who said, I'm from the blah, 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 and I want to come and report on this, and you should let me in for free. And we're very important, and today you should let me in for free, and I should be able to do anything I want. And essentially, after some discussion, Merit went back to them and said, you're welcome to attend just like everybody else, and you will pay the fee. And then we had a side discussion on just the photography stuff. Sorry, Joe.
No, I was just saying I think it's an issue that needs to be poked at a little more because, when looking at this slide, okay, so we've thinned out in here, but with the Paul question out, how many members of that press would have been just sitting in the room as normal attendees?
But that's not a problem. If they're normal attendees, they're normal attendees.
Just, Joe raised another side point there. This audience has thinned out quite a bit, Randy, so there's no chance of really taking any kind of meaningful straw poll here. One thing that I think either you or Betty said was Merit will discourage people from taking photographs during the NANOG meeting, in the meeting. And this is one of the things that I don't think NANOG or Merit has ever done in the past. So I'd be curious to find out, maybe from the broader group, how folks feel about this. How many people say this is really the right thing to do? Because I know there are a lot of folks that take photographs, and I know I have, I know Ren does, I know a variety of folks do. So if we're going to set a precedence, this might be something that we want to draw from the community on and get their opinions. And before we go ahead and say Merit, discourage this, let's make sure the community says that's the right way to go.
Speaking for Merit, Bill, just because the issues come up in a number of venues, I think at least for this meeting, if we could just all be aware that we should refrain from, Merit is not going to police anybody here. We're not trying to create this in terms of a tense meeting venue on either side of the issue. But because we're unsure, if we could just all agree to refrain during the meetings to take pictures of the presenters or in the box, unless otherwise, discussed ahead of time, because we're all grown-ups, we're all professionals, we all know what the issue is. Keep Merit out of the problem, and then have a more formal, open discussion about this when we know more about what the real issues are in the fall meeting. And sort of decide what we need to do with it then. There's not, as you said, Bill, enough people here, I think, to really have a meaningful discussion. But they are real sensitive issues,
Objection. I think we have enough people here to have a meaningful discussion. We may not have enough people here to represent a consensus of the meeting.
Sorry, you're right.
The objection is people don't want to wake up and find their picture in the San Jose whatchamacallit, Mercury tomorrow morning. No, you are not a public. This is not a. There are actually lawyers starting to give their opinions. There'll be more lawyer opinions tomorrow, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not a lawyer and I don't play well on the net.
But I don't want to push that issue down so much, Randy. I think if there is a real problem here, that's one thing. If this is some people that have a concern that there might be a problem sometime, then I think we maybe don't need to react so strongly.
I don't
at
want
this
my
point.
picture in the press, period.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, Vanessa. You're not loud enough.
It's the first time somebody said that. Vanessa Evans from Links. I was a bit confused because you were talking about speakers and the telling of general people not to take pictures of the speakers, and you seem quite specifically to be talking about press, when they are two separate things, aren't they?
Well, let's go back to Joe's question. Then we don't know what the press is. And the case in point is, as I said earlier, for a couple of years now, Ren has been taking pictures of attendees so that if you wanted to come and you wanted to meet Oli, you could look up his picture and find it out. But in fact, what she is doing is taking your picture and publishing it. Is she the press? I'm not a lawyer. Right. Of course. I'm not impugning your action at all. I'm just saying there's this enormous gray area and spectrum problem, and the steering committee's discussed it, and what we came up with tentatively, and people are welcome to change our minds and change the position, is the position that I suggested earlier, which is that the press will pay attendance, and that's for this meeting. And I imagine we'll be discussing this some more, that the press will, if they come, will pay to attend. Merit will, if possible, badge them with a sign saying press, and people will be asked not to, I think the big A goes on your chest, doesn't it? And we'll ask people not to take pictures inside the meetings, but that lets Merit or Ren stop you in the hall and say, hey, do you want to be in our wanted list, and take your picture and put it on the page. It allows the formal press to stop you in the hall and saying, I like what you said, would you give me a few comments, can I take your picture? And that gives you the power to consent or not.
So, Marty Renaissance. So that's uniform for attendees, press, whatever, in the meeting, no pictures, period. Is that's an across the board, everybody, no, press or not, no
Because
photographs.
We can't differentiate.
Yeah.
But as Betty says, you know, we're not going to pick you up and put you in jail. Sylvie.
This is Sylvie from Talgo. I don't have objection to someone I know taking pictures of me or my friends or when we're talking. I think I would find it objectionable if someone I don't know came about, took a picture of people in a group talking, and yes, publishing that in some kind of a newspaper or related article. That I would find inappropriate, but I can't tell you why, really, but I don't like the idea.
I'd like to see if we want to go down this path, Wendy, maybe a straw poll tomorrow or Tuesday. Well, I don't know. My sense that there's
No,
nobody.
my question isn't on the issue, Mike. No, I think, in fact, we've not heard any speakers speak for open photography. But my hesitation is I don't think we want to turn the general meeting into this meeting.
Fair point.
I'm Ole Jacobson. I'm a little curious to why this has come up in this forum and not any other forum that I'm aware of. You know, I just came back from the RIPE meeting, and there are people taking pictures on the dance floor that, you know, I may not want to have actually published anywhere because I don't dance that well. But, you know, we're not talking about, you know, you seem to be lumping together photographs and the press as if they were one thing, and I don't really understand. I mean, is there a specific incident or issue or history that caused you to go down this path?
As I said, we were directly approached by the press. Your statement is incorrect. The ITF has gone through this. People are asked at ITF meetings, people will walk up to them and say, please don't take pictures.
Rob Seastrom again. Since you don't have somebody who's speaking in favor of it, I'll at least go ahead and say as far as I really don't care about open photography. If somebody wants to take my picture while I'm doing something of interest, have at it.
I'm generally that way, although though not specifically not for the press. But I do hear from friends that Ren could have taken better pictures. But probably I contributed to that. Maybe you can't.
I would just comment. I think there might be broader consensus that yes, if this was to be used in a press, the photograph, then yeah, I think there'll be a lot more people who would say, that's probably not the right thing. But I don't think we have a single incidence of this ever happening.
Up until probably 2003, you couldn't find a picture, Marty from Renaissance, you couldn't find a picture of me anywhere on the internet, and that was by design. And by other people's choices, there are now many photographs of me on the internet, and that I arguably allow them and not request them to be taken down because I'm uncomfortable, but I'm comfortable, whatever. But, it wasn't ever my choice to have my picture put out there in the public. It was typically someone else's choice, and I kind of would rather not here in this forum have my picture put out there because it's directly associated with my company, and I need to go back and get permission for those kind of things, and they could be misinterpreted wrong. But there actually is some precedence.
I think I'm hearing a number of different issues. One is the one of press attendance in general. Second is pictures by what we think of as the press. Another is pictures by friends. Another is pictures by gray areas like, is our blog publishers or is Ren's Use publication? God knows. Anybody have any new ideas on the subject? Pardon? Dinner, for sure. And it's Sunday night, and places are not going to be open. 2 or 3 meetings here. This is one we love. Anybody want to whack on this horse some more? We actually were very light on it. It will be in the survey. The last slide says, fill out the survey. Marty.
Marty Renaissance. Okay. Hey, Betty, you did a great job on the presentation, by the way. Thank you very much. And I tried to help out a little bit. It may not have come across as helpful. I apologize. But I just want to say that I totally support 2 meetings a year. And the numbers I kind of ran in my own little spreadsheet, my own little world, kind of actually show that if there's a reduction in the G&A by 1/3, by the 1/3 of the meeting, that you'd actually come out ahead in terms of attendees, because the joint meeting, I went over the last couple of them, and they always seem to be the best attended meeting of the year. And the second meeting per year, based on strategic location, i.e. location that you've seen successful in years past, would probably garner about 500 attendees. And really, I don't have any science to back that particular claim up. It's just a feeling. But I actually support the 2 meetings a year. There's too many meetings as it stands. There are too many meetings to go to, including RIPE and ICANN and ITF and this and that and the other thing, and peering forums. And then even this week, you had a DNS meeting Friday at Cisco that a lot of people showed up early for, went over there and had a meeting, and then came over here. So, yeah, well, right. It says, well, since you're all going to be at NANOG, but I think that, I think you'd come out ahead of the game, and it wouldn't be too painful to cut back to 2 meetings, and I don't think that you get a lot of objection. And I don't know that for sure, but I hope that you spend a lot of time looking at that, because I think it would be in your favor.
Absolutely. Let's talk about favor just for a second. I'm sorry when the discussion came up that I wasn't in the room. I had some other issues. But Merit doesn't own the issue of whether we meet 3 times a year or twice a year, because really it's the partnership issue. Is it important for you all to have 3 meetings a year that are well attended, or is 2 meetings a year with the same attendance or more what you would prefer? I mean, you guys got to give me some feedback to go on. We would prefer to. We think the attendance would be the same. If we had 2 meetings a year, we think the attendance would go up. You got to give me some data points to be able to model around. Otherwise, it's just Betty sitting in her office playing with some numbers. Some of the numbers that don't change, just so you guys know what we're dealing with, is some of the overhead cost. The cost of rent at Merit and just some of the fixed cost aren't going to change. I just have to spread them around over 2 meetings as opposed to 3. But certainly the hotel costs go down, the Merit staff allocation on the project go down because we don't have to hire as much staff to go to meetings. And, just some of the logistics and supply costs go down. So there's certainly some savings. No questions, there's savings. What I have to do is have from you, Marty, if you want to work with me on it and look at the survey data or with the steering committee, whatever, I'm open to having somebody give me some real information to model around as opposed to me just guessing what I think would happen. The real important thing is to talk about it and get some ideas into FY08, because again, as I go about signing on behalf of Merit, on behalf of all of you, these contract locations, it's going to be real expensive to back out of them. So that's why in working with the steering committee, we wanted to hold true to 207, which makes it easier for us to plan. And it certainly makes it possible for me to make a commitment to Merit's board in terms of budgeting practicality, and then look at what we need to do to accommodate the needs of the community in FY08. And I'm certainly supportive of the idea. I know I've talked to the peering community, certainly an outcome of our discussion with Aaron, to find ways in which we can share venues. If there are meetings that are taking place where there's overlap, and there's real reason to have some openness, as long as both meetings are open to the other group. It's just as easy to set up for 1 big meeting as it is 2 small ones in 2 different locations. So we're open to the idea.
Rob Seastrom again. I don't want to put words in either Marty or Betty's mouth as far as what kind of form these meetings would take if we went to 2 meetings a year. But assuming for a moment that one of them stayed with Aaron, I would think that it would be reasonable to assume that the other meeting would probably be longer than just a 2.5-3 day meeting like we're used to having. And I don't know if that's a fair assumption or not, but my experience with the Aaron meetings, and my experience is not universal, although it's far from unique, is, based on my workload during those meetings, is that it ends up being a fairly tiring thing going for a whole week, and that I am wary of having another full week meeting where I have a high. I would hope that Merit would be considering not only the human costs but also the financial costs of having a 5-day meeting versus a 3-day meeting, and all the other stuff. I hope that the model is sufficiently complete.
I think Rob, it just all goes into the modeling. The important thing is for the community to tell us what you would prefer, so that we can go from there. There's no question, the longer the meeting, the greater the hotel expense. Just the fact that we added a day here added to the hotel bill. We know. I mean, we can look at that. Again, it varies location to location. It just increased the cost, and there's only so much balancing you can do without getting into some of the other factors. The real issue and the purpose is the partnership. what do you all feel is important to discuss? How often do you want to travel and attend meetings, and for how long, and where at? I think all of the data points are what the steering committee and Merit really need to hear from before we can tackle the issue. Again, just not trying to harp on the issue, but the important element is to committing to some stability for the next year so we can deal with all of these issues and then put together a plan. And can you continue to dialogue about it so we know what we're doing in FY08?
There's one thing that keeps on being repeated that I hear. Maybe you can tell me if this is right or not. And that is that if you go to 2 meetings a year, it's going to cost Merit more money, and therefore the registration fee has to go up. If that's true, how much would it go up? And have you actually modeled it? Can you share at some point a budget that shows this is what it looks like for 3, this is what it looks like for 2?
I did some initial modeling, but again, it's Betty sitting in the room assuming what the registration would be. If we assume, you all seen the budget slides, that a big piece of the revenue is based on attendance. And if we go to 2 meetings a year and attendance stays low or stays about the same, then we have a revenue imbalance. We lose beer and gear, we lose break, we lose errand sponsorship. You have to figure in all of those numbers. Some of the early predictions, this is just Betty doing some predictions, if we cut out 1 full meeting a year, went to 2, we lost all of that revenue. We stayed at registration at about 400 a meeting, paid registrations, keeping the format the same that it is. Well, excuse me, the modeling I did was keeping our partnership with Aaron in place so that our fall meeting would be back-to-back with Aaron, so there would still be some contribution there. And then we had 1 meeting, just 1 NANOG meeting, not joint with anyone else. And we had a reduction in Merit travel, and we had a reduction in Merit staff. There was, just in Betty's predictions, a slight increase in registration, just to cover the expense balance, just a slight. But I was thinking, 75 would give us a good measure to be able to cover the additional expenses, but certainly a minimum of 25 to 50. But that's, again, Betty looking at making some decisions on venues. Where is it cost effective to go versus just, picking any location out of the hat. So there are, again, a number of variables that go into it. It's just not a complete savings game to think about going to 2 meetings a year. There's no budget impact except a positive one, because some of those numbers in the budget don't change. And in fact, you lose some revenue because of the way the model works.
This is my last comment because I've been at the microphone a lot. I think what we heard before, though, is if you raise the registration fee even $75, most people are not going to care. So if it sounds like the survey form, if that really is a litmus test, then maybe registration fees increase a little bit and go back to 2 meetings.
Well, and that's kind of what I thought. I mean, again, Betty sitting in her office one night late, not having a life, thinking about anything else but all of you, is if I had to increase the registration fee by, let's say, worst case, $75, that's worst case, on the whole, it's a savings because you're not traveling as much. You don't have hotel airfare, and you don't have, the travel, the hotel, all of that associated with it. So on the whole, for the NANOGers, it's a savings, even if the registration fee had to go up slightly to balance the budget. The interesting conversation I had with myself on this late evening is the program. We come back to the relevance of the program and the program committee and the purpose for all of us meeting here. Is there enough program content? Is there enough relevance to support 3 meetings a year? The desire for all of you to meet and network and talk about things? Or is there more value for 2 meetings a year? And is there enough that would require that we meet for 3 full days instead of 4? I mean, I just didn't have enough information.
John Christoph. The only observation I would make is that it seems that for the 3 meetings a year, it seems to afford us, there's always something that happens, like the cogent depeering issue or some security issue that is always very topical at that time. So you may lose some of that if you wait too long between meetings to catch some of those issues.
I agree. I mean, that was my point in pushing for 3. But again, I think that's a lot of the input from the program committee and all of you who are presenters.
My point kind of follows on from John, Mike Hughes. Some of you know I'm a working group chair for one of the working groups at the right meeting, and one of the things that we've noticed doesn't particularly affect my working group because we don't do policy items, but some of the ones that are doing policy items or are developing RIPE documents, what I find is around each meeting you get a bell curve of activity, and then in between it drops off. And what some working group chairs were finding was that it was taking longer to actually get sort of finished products out. Now you can mitigate that by either more participation on a mailing list or having interim things of just that working group. But that was certainly one of the side effects that the right community saw from going from 3 meetings a year to just to 2.
Was that a bug or a feature?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I think for some of them it's probably a bug, whereas other people you may hope it's a feature. Depends on the working group, but that's certainly one of the things that we've experienced in the right region. But the 2 meetings itself has been fairly well received. That's kind of worked. But apart from the delays in things like policy process, the policy process just ground to a halt for like a year because people were just not having. There was no activity in between or insufficient activity in between the meetings themselves.
It's an interesting observation. I wonder if there's any parallel to what Rob and I were just talking about. I missed your presentation, Rob, sorry. One of the observations when I looked earlier at Rob's slides was the amount of the reduced volume of conversation in the NANOG list. And it occurred shortly after our light attendance in February. So,
do we have historical data like Rob just showed? Do we have historical data that goes back over the previous years, and we can say there is a bell curve of activity
not really
for each meeting?
We probably could gather some of that, but it would take Merit a whole lot of effort to get that kind of data. I have stuff for about the last 18 months.
Let's just see how it plays out in the next 12 months, because really, even if you're going to be dealing with your hotel contracts kind of like a year out, you don't really need to get off the pot on the 2 versus 3 decision until next year, really.
Yep.
Not next year. I mean 2008.
Why do it make that change in 2008?
Because Betty's got to put her budget in before the right. Okay.
Yeah, because we're doing hotel contracts out there quite a ways.
Right.
I don't have historical. Rob Seastrom again. I don't have historical information for the number of subscribers for the list over the years, but I can certainly gen up the number of articles month over month for the past 5 years or so and post those to the mailing list tonight or tomorrow.
Ralph from Interworld. If you go to a 2 meeting a year, part of the whole culture of NANOG is the interrelations between people that come here. If somebody misses 1 meeting, it's a whole year before you see the same group of people that are in the culture again. You know, there are certain meeting locations that are frankly geographically undesirable. Michigan is one of them to me. I've never successfully made a Michigan meeting. It's not that I don't want to go there, but it takes 2 planes and it takes too long to get there. You know, that's bottom line. I don't go to. Miami is geographically undesirable to me as well. It's too expensive, and it's, you know, for an independent consultant, those are our problems. And if you miss a meeting and you do it on a 2-year, it's just too long between you before you see people.
Understand. That's why on that one long evening when I was struggling with myself, it was difficult for me to deal with location and number of meetings per year all by myself for that very reason. I'm sorry.
I was wondering if the time. I'm Sylvie. Still. All right. I was wondering if the timing of the events was planned, or is it just because we've done that forever? Why is it June, October, and sometime in the winter? Because I think the Dallas event would have been well attended, but we had this huge snowstorm. People got stranded. And it seems that a January or February event, I mean, that's the continent we live in, we have snow. So could we move that that event? Could we go into some summer months? I don't know. Could we spread the events differently and make sure that they're not concurrent with ripes or apricot?
Hi, this is Jared Mach. So as far as the summer goes, at least here in the U.S., it becomes a lot harder to get on a plane and in the airport. And a lot of the central airports in the U.S. End up having these things called thunderstorms that go and completely destroy the schedule, actually even worse than snow. As far as February goes, I think there was a number of things that contributed to the poor attendance there. I think Valentine's Day was probably the single biggest, and the snowstorm just helped compound it. And as the steering committee, we've heard that Betty we're avoiding Valentine's Day from now on, forever. It's been permanently blacklisted as far as I believe and understand. So we think things like that are going to get better, and the summer is really just a bad time in North America.
Well, there probably ought to be a discussion of all the stuff that people care about, not just regular apricot, but Aaron, interop.
I think this discussion needs to use microphones.
Yes. I'll just comment. The reason why the meetings are when they are is historical. I believe that's when the regional tax meetings used to be. And my guess is that they were scheduled that way to avoid conflicts with the AETF meetings, which were also 3 times a year and opposite months. And tangled, okay.
There were no ripe meetings.
And there were no ripe meetings, and there were no apricot meetings, and yada yada. Yes, scheduling is important, and I'll let the people who know something about that talk about it.
There is a calendar we all use, and we try to squeeze them. But the fact is, by the time you put them all in, there's nothing you're going to do. It's like the season from March through May and early June is just, if you try to go to ripe, apricot, you're dead.
Y'all asked for feedback.
Yes,
We've
I'm
heard
asking
feedback.
for
No, totally. Ren Provost still. We have heard from other attendees for the last few months that the reason that they're not coming to NANOG is because they have to choose to go to Europe or to go to the United States. And many of us support multiple continents. Hi, Sylvie. And so we have to abandon one continent for the other because they're back to back, and you can't make it from one to the other and go home in the middle to see your family. It's unfortunate, and NANOG is losing out on attendees because of this.
When you try to do the registries and the ops, there is no time, and unless you make more weeks in the year.
Betty, I think we did once talked about this, and we looked at survey numbers to try and work out how many of the NANOG community actually went to other meetings like Ripe and Apricot. I think we found out when we looked at the numbers that it's a relatively small percentage of the total community that actually go to more than one, that go to Ripe and NANOG, or Apricot and NANOG.
At least in the survey data that they sent back to us, yes.
So based on that, the problem with scheduling with other meetings is more to do with scheduling speakers than it is with people having to travel too much. I mean, you're a minority, I think, if you go to all the meetings. We had a survey year where they had boxes of what other conferences do you attend, I think.
Yep. Yeah, it was just again, it was one of those questions, how many other conferences do you attend? Click some, but it wasn't as detailed, and we certainly can improve upon it, but again, what can come out of this meeting, at least in terms of feedback, is to share with us in the comment section what meetings to avoid.
Right, that's exactly the exercise. Ole Jacobson again, that's exactly the exercise the ITF has gone through recently. And they have a list of must not avoid and should not avoid list if you go to the ITF webpage. And I think maybe NANOG needs to develop the same thing.
we've done that, and we have a list, and we coordinate with all the other ops group and with the registry groups, and we keep a common calendar that's at Joe. Where's the? It's WSI Edu ISOC.org calendar. It's maintained by University of Oregon and Lucy Lynch and that crew. But we specifically, as NANOG, have a list of what we avoid, and it includes all the other registries, all the other ops groups, including the smaller fragmenting ops groups that you see happening around the world, like SANOG and PACNOG and ZNOG, and it includes ITF. But what I'm trying to say to Ren is, if you take that list and then you add a cushion of like a week between them, there aren't enough days in the year. That's what it comes down to. The internet became popular. It's got its good and its bad points. Prioritizing them's fine.
I could put it on the electronic survey form.
But not the paper.
I'll rework the electronic section. It'll probably be up Monday afternoon or so. The hard copy form, we might not capture all the information, but we can note it. So it would be really helpful, if all of you would use the electronic version of the survey form. It takes double the effort for us to enter.
Dead trees are bad. Sorry, Mike Hughes. One of the things I just thought of is with regard to the historical data of who attends the overlapping meetings. Is there any point, if anybody's got the time, inclination, effort, whatever, to take some data from the previous years where we don't have any data of who's attending what meetings, and just try and do some sort of union of the data? Because NANOG publishes an attendee list, Right Meetings publish attendee, most meetings publish attendee lists. Just get this lot, slurp it into a database and do a union of it.
We did. There's some summary data. I can't speak to it because I haven't been back there, but when we went through the evolution process, we summarized all the survey data and put it out on the website. So you can find the historical data. I just don't know how it's summarized and what it's comparing.
No, what Mike means,
survey data.
What
this
Mike
is the
means is
attendee
we
data.
have a section on our website where you can go to and find out who attended the meeting in Bialystok in 1948. So does Wright, so does everybody else. The problem you're going to have is fuzzy name match.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Sorry.
Because I'm lazy. Thank you, though. So, Betty, there's a lot of good suggestions, and, Marty from Renaissance, I think some are like the difference between 2-color napkins and 4-color napkins, and we can sit around and say, hey, let's not have any toilet paper in the men's room, and that'll save us, $50 for the meeting. And I think that, I guess I'm going to have to, I'd like to disagree with you. Not I'm going to have to, but I'd like to disagree with you on the G&A cost being it is what it is. I think that, that's one of the costs that, if there's a cost to focus on and that's actually meaningful, that's one of them, I think. But in relation to whether there's 2 or 3 meetings as well. So you're right, it is a partnership and whatnot. As far as like who goes to what meetings and when they are, I think it's good to try and schedule them, but most of that's a business decision, whether you need to go from RIPE to NANOG, and I've done it, and it's been a business requirement that I do both, and I'm okay with that. I don't have any pets or anything. I don't have to go home and feed anything, and it's easy for me to do that, and it's not so easy for other people. But the correlation, I can tell you, I look at the RIPE attendee list to see who's there, and yeah, it's an inconvenience to some people, but again, it comes back to what business you're in.
And Marty, you make a good point, and I certainly don't want anyone to walk away from my presentation or the community meeting thinking that Merit's really happy with its G&A. We're not.
And could you add whether or not you have pets to the question?
Mary's in the room. Brian's in the room with me. We all struggled with that question when we did our budget. None of us are really, really happy with the overhead expenses at Merit. Pets? I thought you said G&A. Did I already go? Sorry.
My humor, don't let it
Okay.
confuse you.
Guys, I haven't eaten today and I'm tired now. Anyways, yeah, going on. The it is what it is question is it is what it is for FY07. As we look at the 2 meeting a year issue and all of our budget issues, there's no question Merit continues to try to bring that number down.
Yeah. Realize that her FY07 is only half of our real FY08. Mailing list AUP change, I think he covered this. Did he not? Okay. This is the real underlying question, which is addresses the program, addresses frequency of meetings, et cetera, et cetera. We could go to 0 meetings a year if we don't keep this relevant and useful to everybody. So,
and you can retain the Aaron contribution, you'd be $50,000 in the black.
That's true. So, you know, what of the benefit is meeting folk in the hall or wherever you meet them? What of the benefit is the prezos? What of the benefits is the box? What of the benefits? I hope nobody thinks this meeting's very beneficial. Hey, I asked, run the schedule or go late. Everybody said go late. I'm trying to finish by 8 o'clock. But this, I believe, is a real serious underlying question. We have another is, you know, who do we serve? The level of organization. Right now, you know, Merit's supporting us, and like this, we've already got 3 bleeding committees. We'd rather not have more of them. We're trying to be minimalist, but I could see folk wanting, let's have a real organization, let's take control of our own destiny, let's talk to lawyers and budgets and all that stuff, and let's have people with ribbons on their badges and all that stuff. Excuse me for putting it in such a pejorative term. As you can tell, I'm not inclined. But I think the membership has a right to be inclined if you are so inclined. Nobody wants to pick that one up, huh? I think we can learn from the ITF and ISOC why not to go down that path. They're certainly making a mess of it. You know, is the SCP-CML too much? Are you hearing too much from us? Is there too much formality? Is there not enough? Is there things we should be doing in organizational sense that, you know, we're dropping on the floor that we shouldn't be? Does anyone other than Martin read the SC minutes? Ah, there we go. Thank you. Thank you. I'll get last Thursday's out. I will. And of course, the content, which is supposedly why we're here, for the peanut butter and the sandwich. Yep.
No, Bill, you said you weren't going to talk.
Go for it, Bill.
I know Ren is kind of leading the charge on this 2 meeting versus 3 meeting thing. There are a lot of folks that are also chiming in saying it's a very important issue. I just want to make sure I understand the process right. If you're at this meeting and you're going to fill out the survey form, you're one of the lucky people who get to decide if, starting in 2008, from then on, it's going to be 2 meetings versus 3. If you didn't happen to attend this meeting, then your vote's not being taken into account.
But he can fill out the electronic survey form.
Aha. Okay.
So you should. So, Bill, what you want to do is put out an announcement on NANOG.org. Hey, even if you didn't come, fill out the survey form. Tell us why you didn't come. Tell us whether you want more of the meetings you don't come to. The more alfalfa that Major's father didn't grow, the more the government paid him not to grow. Yes.
Randy, Mike Hughes again. The electronic survey used to only be available from the meeting net. It was ACL'd. You couldn't fill it in from outside the meeting net. I don't know whether it still is the case.
Somebody tunnel somewhere and find out.
And the surveys electronically
No.
No, it is not restricted. It's at the NANOG website. There will be 2 questions. Just simply, did you attend the meeting in person? Did you attend the meeting remotely? We just simply try to get an assessment of where you were at when you're, viewing the content, make some conclusions about the validity, not the validity, wrong term, just your perception of the speaker, the presentation, because you were in person, you were interacting with it, or you were seeing the presentation remotely over the broadcast. But it's not restricted. It's, again, NANOG is not a membership organization, so anybody out there can complete the survey. No. I don't have a scripted process in place where I look at your packet or any of that kind of stuff. Oh, do you want me to?
No.
Okay. Well, it's not. It's not. Sorry. It's an open survey.
One request, Betty. Rob
But
Seastrom again.
if everybody completes the same question 100 times, you're skewing the results.
One request is that for things that are fairly binary in nature, like should we have 2 or 3 meetings a year, that you have an option for I don't care.
It is there.
Okay.
I don't know if I got the format. Ren's seen it, the steering committee seen it. I'm not exactly sure if we've got the right format for asking the questions, but there's certainly lots of spaces for comments. I might suggest if anybody at all is interested in signing up, sending me an email message or something, I'd be happy to work with the group over here in our open seating, and we can continue the discussion and do some modeling. I'll make myself available when we talk about it.
We're out of here.
Bye.